Welcome back, brothers and heretics, to Grimhammer. Tonight we're diving into the lore of the Obliterator virus. Before we get into the madness, be sure to like and comment any videos and topics you want to see in the future. Be sure to subscribe from the Emperor or the Dark Gods. And I want to thank you guys for support. I've been killing it like always. Now, let's get to the video.
The eye of terror did not shine. It bled. It hung beyond the armoured viewing ports of the graven anvil like a wound cut through the hide of reality, a storm of impossible colour and dead starlight where laws had gone to rot. Warp lightning crawled across the void in branching veins. Dead moons turned in slow orbits around suns that screamed without sound. Asteroid foundries spat molten iron into the darkness, their furnace maws chained to the siege barge by cables thicker than hive spires. Slave hulks drifted beside them, each one packed with breathing cargo, each one marked for labour, sacrifice, experimentation, or ammunition hauling. The graven anvil was not a ship in the way loyal men understood ships. It was a fortress dragged screaming through the void. Its flanks were layered with rust-black armour plating, siege shields, macro cannon batteries, chained gun servitors, and the calcified remains of boarding craft fused to its hull from wars too old to remember. Its prow had been shaped like a blunt iron hammer, not for beauty, not for terror, but for the brutal practicality of ramming crippled prey and cracking open void stations like bones. Across its dorsal spine rose towers of black iron and corpse stone, each one crowned with flak batteries and hanging cages. In those cages, prisoners froze, thawed, rotted, and froze again whenever the vessel translated between real space and the immaterium. The grave-forged host had called it home since the long defeat. They were iron warriors, and they endured because endurance was all that remained to them. They raided imperial manufactorums for shells, promethium, slaves, armor plate, and gene seed. They sold ammunition to renegade fleets and took payment in blood, metal, or obedience. They broke orbital bastions for lesser warbands, too impatient to conduct proper siegecraft. They took no joy in worship, no comfort in brotherhood, no pride in mercy. They measured existence by use: meat, iron, fuel, gene seed, waste. Warsmith Kargan Dral stood in the strategium beneath a vault of hanging chains, his armour the colour of burned gunmetal, his helm locked beneath one arm. His skull was pale, scarred, and hairless, with iron studs set along the ridge of his brow where a mortal man would have carried expression. Servo cables ran from his spine into the command throne behind him, though he refused to sit. Sitting was for tyrants who trusted their walls. Dral trusted nothing that had not survived bombardment. Before him, hololithic images flickered above a slab of black adamantium. St. Cordax's rest turned slowly in the projection, a quarantine moon sealed beneath void shields and orbital warning beacons. Red sigils marked defense batteries, amber runes marked subterranean vault complexes, white runes marked probable munitions stores, green runes marked contamination. Dral cared about the white runes. The green ones interested him only because they might defend the white. "Report," he said. A legionary in battered cataphractii plate inclined his helm. The moon remains under imperial quarantine. Automated warning signals repeat on all open channels. No civilian traffic. No sanctioned Mechanicus salvage. Defense grid dormant but active. Auspex confirms heat signatures beneath the northern vault fields. Numbers: 3 regiments of Astra Militarum remnants, penal cohorts, quarantine wardens, Mechanicus observers. No confirmed Adeptus Astartes presence. Dral's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Then it is an ammunition depot guarded by frightened men. "Also, plague stores," said another voice. The speaker approached through the strategium doors to the scrape of metal limbs and the wet click of organic seals. Magos Malagrax Nethor came surrounded by servo skulls, crawling incense burners, and 2 hooded vat thralls dragging a relic coffin behind him on suspensor chains. He had once possessed a human shape. He had improved upon it until humanity was only a memory hidden somewhere inside folds of red-black robes and polished surgical steel. His face was a mask of brass and flayed skin stitched around a cluster of green lenses. His hands were not hands, but instruments, each finger ending in a different sacred violation. The Iron Warriors watched him with the contempt they reserved for priests, sorcerers, and anything that mistook mystery for strength. Dral looked at the relic coffin. "You are late. Chronology is unstable in the eye, Warsmith. Complaint is inefficient." I did not complain. No, Nethor said, lenses clicking as they focused. You threatened by implication. Acceptable. Efficient. The coffin settled onto the strategium floor with a sound like a shell dropped into a grave. It was sealed in iron bands, warding chains, hexagrammic plates, and strips of skin inked with binary cant. Something inside it shifted, not moved, shifted, as if several materials had disagreed on which one of them was alive. Draal's lieutenants reached for weapons. Nethor's mechadendrites trembled in what might have been amusement. You bring me a corpse, Draal said. I bring you a lesson discovered aboard the Plague Hulk Benediction of Rust, lost after the heresy, recovered beyond the 7th Screaming Shoal. Its holds contained dead Death Guard, dead Iron Warriors, dead Mortals, dead engines, and one thing that refused classification. Open it! The Magos lifted one claw. The seals released in sequence. Locks cracked. Wards flared and died. The coffin lid rose on protesting hinges. Inside lay a mass of fused ceramite, meat, cable, and gun barrels. It had once been an Astartes. That truth remained only in the broadness of the shoulders and the suggestion of a helm half swallowed by swollen armor. Flesh had grown through plate. Plate had grown through flesh. Ammunition belts looped into ribs that were also feed mechanisms. Barrel clusters protruded from one arm in a bouquet of rusted hunger. A cracked, heavy bolter had melted into the chest cavity, its muzzle opening and closing by a fraction as if tasting the air. Wires burrowed through blackened muscle. Bone had become iron. Iron had become something that bled. The thing in the coffin was dead. The thing in the coffin was dreaming. A burst of Binharic static hissed through every vox grill in the strategium. Several mortal attendants screamed as their eardrums burst. One fell to his knees, clawing at his face, blood running between his fingers. Nethor inclined his masked head as if listening to sacred music. It dreams in binary, the Magos said. Not a disease, not merely. A communion between appetite and armament. Draal stared into the coffin. Name it. The archives are contradictory. After the War Master's failure, the legions fled into the Eye and found plagues unknown to the Materium. Some strains were born of the Plague God's garden, some resemble Nurgle's rot only in their contempt for clean flesh. Other fragments suggest deliberate craft. Fabius Bile is named in several corrupted records, though never with useful certainty. There are Iron Warriors references as well. Your kind have always loved weapons more than breath. My kind love victory. Then you may love this. The dead thing clicked. One of its gun barrels rotated once, slow and dry. Draal turned back to the hololith of St. Cordax's rest. What is inside the moon? Nethor's lenses brightened. Quarantined arms, infected arms, plague-tested prisoners, failed experiments, Mechanicus notes, possibly earlier vectors. Your warriors will take the vaults. My adepts will harvest what survives. And if nothing survives, then we harvest what remains. Draal looked to the assembled legionaries. Prepare the host. No cheer answered him. Iron warriors did not cheer. They calculated, armed, and obeyed. Varkal Mordrin received the assault order in the arming vaults, while a slave tightened the ammunition feed across his back. He stood motionless beneath hanging lumen strips, clad in battered Mark III plate, patched with blackened reinforcement slabs and hazard-striped greaves. His helm rested on a shrine of spent shell casings before him. His autocannon lay across a rack of iron teeth, belt-fed, oil-dark, and scarred from a century of sieges. It had killed loyalists, mutants, orcs, cultists, and brothers who had stood too close to ammunition Mordrin required. The slave fastening the feed belt shook as he worked. Mordrin could smell his fear through the rebreather stink, sweat, and old piss beneath machine oil. Your hands are inefficient, Mordrin said. The slave froze. Forgive me, Lord. Do not seek forgiveness. Increase function. The slave worked faster. His fingers slipped. A shell clattered against Mordrin's pauldron. Mordrin turned his head. Slowly, the slave began to pray under his breath, not to the Emperor. No slave aboard the graven anvil was foolish enough to let that name pass his lips. He prayed to iron, to silence, to whatever small spirit might hide in the cracks of the deck, and refused to notice him. Mordrin picked up the fallen shell between two armored fingers. This has touched the floor. Yes, Lord. It has been made less clean by your weakness. I will replace it, Lord. You will. The slave reached for the belt. Mordrin caught his wrist and squeezed until bone collapsed with a wet crunch inside the skin. The man made a thin animal noise. Mordrin released him and handed him the shell. "Carry it in your mouth until we deploy." The slave obeyed, sobbing around the brass casing. Across the vault, other Iron Warriors armed in silence. Havocs checked missile tubes and lascannons. Breachers locked siege shields to gauntlets. Chosen loaded combi bolters and chained blades to wrist mounts. Warpsmith thralls dragged crates of crack charges past racks of chain axes and melter guns. A dark apostle watched from a gantry, unwanted and ignored, whispering promises to gods the Iron Warriors did not trust. Mordrin hated the gods. He hated their laughter in the walls, their bargains, their gifts that always took more than they gave. He hated the Imperium for surviving. He hated the Loyalists for kneeling to a corpse and calling it duty. He hated mortals for breaking quickly. He hated his brothers for mistaking bitterness for purpose. But he loved the autocannon, not with affection. Affection was weakness. He loved it as a wall loved weight, as a shell loved breach pressure, as iron loved the furnace because the furnace made it useful. His vox clicked. "Mordrin," said Warsmith Dral. Mordrin took his helm from the casing shrine and sealed it over his head. The world became red targeting runes, pressure readouts, ammo count ghosts, and the breath of his armor's machine spirit growling through old filters. "I hear. You will lead havoc reduction on the northern vault fields. Enemy density? Acceptable. Armor? Light to moderate. Expect emplaced guns, mortals, contaminated material." Mordrin lifted the autocannon. The weapon's weight settled into his grip like remembered hatred. "Range confirmed. Meat density acceptable. Begin reduction." The graven anvil opened fire before the first landing craft descended. Macro cannon shells fell through the void in burning lines, each one a cathedral of explosive mass hurled by spiteful engines. St. Cordax's rest vanished beneath impact blossoms. Void shields flared pale and sickly over the quarantine moon, taking the first barrage, the second, the third. On the fourth, shield segments failed. On the fifth, defense towers became upward waterfalls of stone, metal, and men. Orbital warning beacons continued to transmit even as their towers broke apart. The Iron Warriors did not rush the breach. They let the guns speak. They let the moon learn the shape of defeat. Then came the trenching crawlers. They dropped in armored descent cages, massive digging engines with dozer blades, rotary drills, and shielded artillery nests along their backs. They landed among the bombardment craters and began to cut approach lines through blasted regolith. Behind them came the slave infantry, thousands of chained mortals in scrap armor, shock collars, and rebreather masks. They were driven forward by overseer fire, stumbling through minefields, plague fog, and razor wire. Every detonation mapped another hazard. Every corpse made the ground safer for iron. Mordrin watched from the assault ramp of a descending gunship as slaves burst apart below, red mist freezing in the thin atmosphere. Servo skulls drifted ahead of the Iron Warriors' advance, their lens clusters scanning for heat signatures and gun nests. Data streamed across Mordrin's visor. Useful, wasteful, useful, wasteful. The ramp slammed down. Havoc Squad Mordrin stepped into war. Lasfire stitched the grey dust. Heavy stubbers barked from bunker slits. Mortars thumped behind broken quarantine walls. Mordrin's autocannon roared in answer, the recoil punching through his armor and into his bones. He walked as he fired. Each burst chewed apart a firing slit, a sandbag wall, a human shape behind it. A guardsman rose with a missile launcher. Mordrin's next burst took him from hip to skull and painted the bunker interior with meat and armor scraps. His brothers formed kill lanes with practiced malice. Lascannons burned through watchtowers. Missile launchers collapsed trench mouths. Heavy bolters hammered penal cohorts into the mud. Breachers advanced behind shields, firing through vision ports, stepping over slaves who had not died quickly enough. The defenders fought with the desperation of men abandoned by their own masters. Mordrin respected that only as one might respect a jammed hatch for taking longer to breach. They wore quarantine seals and ash-grey greatcoats. Their officers carried bolt pistols and screamed about the throne. Their priests held up icons until shrapnel tore the icons and the hands apart together. "Left emplacement," voxed Brother Kordak. "Seen," Mordrin replied. A multi-laser nest tracked toward them from behind a collapsed Medici dome. Mordrin shifted his stance, compensated for wind shear, Dust interference, slave bodies in the line of fire, and the mild tremor in his ammunition feed. He fired a sustained burst. The first shells walked across the dome. The last entered the weapon's capacitor housing. The emplacement became light, then wreckage, then meat rain. They reached the first vault doors under the cover of artillery. Warpsmith thralls placed melter charges, breachers locked shields. Mordrin stood in the center of the approach causeway and killed anything that moved. His targeting display painted men as heat shapes, threat values, probable wounds. He did not see faces. Faces were lies told by meat to pretend it mattered. The charges detonated. The vault doors sagged inward. Inside St. Cordax's rest, the air was warm and wet. The moon's catacombs descended in layers of quarantine vaults, medici cells, weapon lockers, execution pits, and Mechanicus observation chambers. Red lumen strips flickered through plague haze. Warning sigils covered the walls in High Gothic and Binharic script. Some had been scratched away from the inside. Some had been written over in dried blood. The Iron Warriors found prisoners chained to examination racks. Guardsmen, penal soldiers, failed cultists, men with blackened hands and swollen veins, men whose teeth had turned metallic, men whose skin puckered around brass casings pressed into their palms. Some begged, some cursed, some laughed and called the approaching legionaries angels. Draal's order came over the command vox. Do not purge all subjects, process them. So they processed them. Prisoners were dragged from cells and chained to weapon racks. Dark Mechanicum adepts forced laser guns, auto pistols, knives and bolter magazines into their hands. Some weapons did nothing. Some made the men convulse. Some caused flesh to crawl around triggers and stocks as if trying to swallow them. When a prisoner survived longer than a few breaths, Nethor's servo skulls descended to cut samples from him while he screamed. One guardsman was made to carry a crate of tainted ammunition down the corridor. By the time he reached the end, his fingers had fused around the handles. By the time he was ordered back, his palms had split open and brass had sunk into the meat. He tried to drop the crate and could not. He begged for a last shot. An Iron Warrior gave him one through the spine, then ordered 2 slaves to carry him and the crate together. Mordrin passed the experiments without interest. Cruelty was not the point. Cruelty was only the sound weakness made while becoming useful. The deepest vault lay beneath a chapel of warning bells. Every bell had been silenced with wax, cloth, or strips of skin. The door was not like the others. It had no imperial aquila, no Mechanicus cog, only layered hexagrammic seals, corrosion and claw marks from the inside. Cordac voxed. Melter! Mordrin looked at the door. His auspex returned static. His armor's machine spirit growled low in his ears. No, manual breach. That is inefficient. It is sealed against heat. Cordac said nothing. 2 breachers set chain hooks into the door. Servo motors whined. The hinges screamed. Rust fell in sheets. Mordrin stepped forward, locked one fist into the torn edge, and pulled. The door gave way with a sound like a giant choking. Cold breathed out. The chamber beyond was lined with weapons. Bolters, autoguns, plasma coils, chain blades, grenade launchers, ammunition belts, heavy weapon frames sealed in glass shrines. Some were tagged with quarantine. Markers. Some were wrapped in prayer strips. Some were chained down. The air smelled of oil, rot, and old thunder. At the chamber's center rested a heavy bolter on a plinth of black iron. It was ancient, wide-barreled, brutally made. Its casing was scarred by corrosion and battle damage. Its ammunition feed hung empty. Its muzzle was dark. It should have been cold. It had slept in a vault beneath a dead moon for longer than most mortal bloodlines endured. Mordrin knew before touching it that it was warm. Mark the chamber, Cordac said. Call the Magos. Mordrin ignored him. He reached for the heavy bolter. The weapon's trigger guard twitched. Mordrin gripped the casing and tore it free of the plinth. Chains snapped. Warning seals burned blue-white and vanished. His gauntlets scraped across the trigger guard, and something thin and sharp slid through ceramite as if the armor were wet cloth. Pain flashed across his palm. Not much. Not enough to matter. Blood welled inside his gauntlet. Then the blood moved. It did not drip. It crawled. Mordrin watched through his visor as his blood threaded itself into cracks in the bolter's casing. Red became black. Black became oil. The weapon shivered in his hand. For a moment, every Vox channel died. No battle, no artillery, no screams, no brothers, no gods. Only a rhythm, not a voice. Mordrin would have rejected a voice. Voices belonged to sorcerers, priests, cowards, and things that wanted worship. This was cleaner, a count beneath the world, a hunger measured in recoil, a silence waiting to be filled by impact. Kordak turned. Mordrin! Mordrin lifted the heavy bolter in one hand and his autocannon in the other. The weight should have been awkward. It was not. His injured palm did not hurt. His breathing steadied. His hearts found the rhythm and obeyed it. Imperial counterattack runes flashed across his visor. Heat signatures surged down the corridor outside the vault. Quarantine stormtroopers, carapace armored, respirators sealed, hellguns raised, disciplined, frightened, useful. Mordrin stepped into the corridor. His autocannon fired first. The heavy bolter fired with it. He did not remember pulling the second trigger. Mass reactive shells punched into the stormtroopers and detonated inside them. Bodies burst against the walls. Helmets spun away, trailing neck meat. Hellguns clattered from hands that were no longer attached. A sergeant tried to shout an order. The heavy bolter found his chest and opened him from within. Ribs and armor plating peeling outward in a red flower. Mordrin advanced through the spray. His aim was perfect, not improved. Perfect. The autocannon bucked, the heavy bolter hammered, and his body moved between their recoils as if it had been built for both. Shell counters flickered. Heat warnings pulsed. He smelled his own blood cooking inside his gauntlet and felt nothing but alignment. When the corridor fell silent, he stood among the dead with smoke curling from both weapons. Kordak stared at him. You are wounded. No. Your hand. Mordrin looked down. Blood had sealed around the cut. The heavy bolter's casing was still slick with it. No, he repeated. Above them, unseen by Mordrin, a servo skull watched from a cracked archway. Its lens dilated. Its vox whispered to Malagrax Nethor in streams of Binharic excitement. In the strategium of the graven anvil, Warsmith Dral watched the feed without expression. Nethor stood beside him, mechadendrites twitching. Contact confirmed. Primary subject shows immediate compatibility. Will he survive? Survival is imprecise. He will continue. Designation. The Magos bowed his brass mask. Ferrum Primus. Dral watched Mordrin wade through the dead, unaware that he had already been named by men who no longer considered him a brother. Do not inform him, the Warsmith said. Consent is inefficient, Nethor replied. Consent is irrelevant. The raid ended in victory because the Iron Warriors defined victory by extraction. The vaults were stripped. Prisoners were chained in cargo holds. Tainted weapons were sealed in reliquaries. Ammunition crates were loaded by slaves whose hands blistered and blackened from contact with the brass. St. Kordax's rest burned behind them, its quarantine signals still transmitting to an Imperium that would arrive too late, record too little, and understand nothing. Aboard the graven anvil, Mordrin returned to the arming vaults. The slave with the broken wrist was gone, dead, replaced, processed. Mordrin did not ask. He sat on an iron bench beneath the lumen strips and laid his autocannon across his knees. The captured heavy bolter had been taken by Nethor's adepts. Mordrin had allowed it because Dral had ordered it and because the autocannon remained. He removed his gauntlet. The cut across his palm had closed. A dark line marked the flesh, too straight to be a scar, too black to be dried blood. It looked like a seam. Mordrin flexed his fingers. They obeyed. He began the rites of maintenance. Strip, clean, oil, inspect, reassemble. The motions were old, sacred in their utility. He whispered no prayer. He offered no thanks. He checked the barrel, the receiver, the feed mechanism, the recoil buffers, the casing teeth. His breathing slowed. The autocannon clicked. Mordrin stopped. The feed mechanism moved by itself. Only once. A single shell pushed into the ammunition belt where there had been an empty link. Brass surfaced as if rising through water. Its casing was wet. Its tip glistened dark red. Tiny veins pulsed beneath the metal. Mordrin stared at it for a long time. Then, somewhere deep inside the weapon, something counted down. Mordrin did not change. That was the first lie. He woke in the arming vaults after the raid on St. Kordax's rest, with his heart beating in the same old rhythm, his lungs dragging the same filtered air through the same scarred chest, his armor locked around the same transhuman bulk. His helm lenses still painted the world in kill runes and range ghosts. his hands still closed with the strength to crush a mortal skull through a plasteel helmet. His scars remained where they had been. His old wounds ached when the graven anvil shuddered through warp turbulence. His hatred retained its familiar shape. No horns pushed through his skull. No lesions opened across his flesh. No laughter whispered from the walls with his name on its tongue. No gods came to claim him. So Mordrin judged himself unchanged. That was the second lie. He drilled with the havocs in the iron galleries beneath the siege barge's dorsal batteries. He locked his boots into recoil braces and fired until the galleries filled with smoke, brass, and the stink of burned propellant. He stripped his autocannon by touch, cleaned the receiver, checked the feed teeth, and inspected every shell that passed through his hands. Once, while replacing a damaged loading claw, a sliver of metal opened the black seam across his palm. The wound leaked a single bead of blood onto the weapon's casing. A mortal armor serf wiped it away before the drop could fall. Mordrin saw the act and felt irritation rather than gratitude. "Do not touch my blood," he said. The serf froze, cloth in hand, head bowed so low his forehead almost struck the decking. "Forgive me, Lord. I sought only to cleanse the sacred mechanism." "There is nothing sacred in cleansing, only maintenance." "Yes, Lord." "Repeat." The serf swallowed. "Only maintenance." Mordrin returned to the autocannon. The serf backed away, pressing the stained cloth against his own palm as if to hide it. Before the next watch cycle ended, the man was bent double in a slave alcove, coughing into his hands. Brass dust glittered between his fingers. His gums bled black around teeth that felt too hard in his mouth. He told no one. Slaves aboard the graven anvil learned early that suffering became worse when noticed. Mordrin never knew. He ate in the warrior's refectory, consuming nutrient paste, recycled protein, and slabs of vat-grown flesh, cut from beasts that had never known light. He slept standing in his armor, chained into an alcove beneath ammunition shrines, made from spent casings and broken Imperial Aquilas. He bled into gauntlets. He touched armor racks. He passed shells to his brothers during fire discipline. He checked a missile tube for Brother Kordak and left a smear of dark fluid along the launch room. He gripped the shoulder guard of a renegade armsman who came too close to his ammunition belt and shoved the man aside hard enough to break ribs. Everywhere he touched, the warship listened. The graven anvil translated from the Warp 3 watches later. Reality tore open around it with the sound of a million blades scraping bone. The siege barge forced itself into real space trailing storms of empiric frost, its hull bleeding witchlight from cracks between armor plates. Slave ships and asteroid foundries came with it in staggered emergence, chained to the warship by tractor locks and ritual anchors. Several lesser craft did not survive the translation. One became a cloud of screaming metal. Another turned inside out, spilling bodies into the void like seeds from a split fruit. Drál recorded the losses, marked them acceptable, and ordered the fleet forward. Ahead lay Varadon Secundus. It was not a world. It was a machine that happened to possess gravity. Hive moons circled a furnace planet wrapped in manufacturum rings and orbital dockyards. Promethium refineries burned on tidally locked satellites where oceans of industrial fuel rolled beneath black vapor skies. Cargo elevators rose from forge temples to void stations like spears aimed at heaven. Ammunition arcs crawled between moons under escort, fat and armored, each one carrying enough shells to murder continents. Skitarii forge enclaves glowed with red lumen and machine incense. Macro cranes dragged ore asteroids into refinery mouths. Billions labored in its depths, most born beneath ceilings of iron, most dying without ever seeing a star except as a warning rune on a munition crate. To the Imperium, Varadon Secundus was loyal, productive, and therefore blessed. To Drál, it was stockpile. To the Dark Mechanicum, it was a body waiting to be opened. The War Council gathered in the Strategium, while the Forge system grew in the Hololith. Warsmith Drál stood beneath hanging chain banners, his iron face lit by the glow of target icons. Around him waited Iron Warriors captains, warpsmiths, demon engine handlers, and Malagrak's Nethor, whose mechadendrites coiled with restrained hunger. "The Imperium fights on every border," Drál said. "Xenos at their gates, demons in their dreams, heretics in their arteries. Their corpse throne bleeds men and machines into 1,000 wars and calls the hemorrhage duty. Varadon feeds those wars. We will interrupt the feeding. A lieutenant in scorched plate inclined his helm. Primary target, Drál gestured. The hololith narrowed to a vast ammunition arc moving between a hive moon and an orbital forge ring. Its name scrolled in corrupted Gothic across the projection. Martyr of St. Drusus, Drál said. Mechanicus ammunition arc. Void shields moderate. Escort light. Holds contain macro shells, bolt munitions, plasma cells, promethium canisters, and Skitarii reserve stores. We take the arc intact. And the crew? Asked Kordak. Meet! Nethor's lenses clicked. Permission to sample contaminated contact sites after boarding. Drál looked at him. Your samples will not delay extraction. Extraction is not my concern. Propagation is. Several Iron Warriors turned their helms toward the Magos. The word sat in the strategium like a loaded shell. Drál did not ask for clarification. He already understood enough. Mordrin leads the forward breach. Kordak's helm tilted. He was exposed on St. Kordax's rest. He functions. He may be compromised. Drál's eyes did not move from the hololith. Everything in this fleet is compromised. The relevant question is whether it remains useful. Mordrin heard the exchange over the squad vox in the arming vault and felt nothing. Concern was a loyalist indulgence. Suspicion was simply another form of range finding. He stood while thralls locked fresh ammunition belts across his back. One of them was the armsman he had shoved aside during drill. The man's ribs had been splintered with crude iron bands. His breath came wetly. He handled each autocannon shell as if it were alive. You are slow, Mordrin said. The armsman flinched. Pain impedes function, Lord. Then remove pain from the equation. I cannot. Then pain has mastered you. The armsman tried to answer, but his fingers stuck to one of the shells. He pulled. Skin stretched. The brass held. His fingerprints had fused into the casing. Ridges of flesh sunk into metal as if pressed into soft wax. He stared, mouth open. Mordrin looked down. Defective shell, he said. Yes, Lord. Discard yourself with it after deployment. The armsman bowed, trembling. Mordrin turned away. The assault craft launched in silence. Boarding torpedoes and dreadclaw talons streaked from the graven anvil through the black, masked behind a storm of chaff, scrap drones, and false vox ghosts. The Martyr of St. Drusus detected them late, its machine spirit too burdened by routine obedience to imagine treachery from within the clutter of sanctioned traffic. Warning lights flashed along its hull. Void shields flared. Point defense batteries opened fire, filling space with tracer streams. The Iron Warriors came through anyway. Mordrin's boarding torpedo struck the arc below the portside munitions spine. Impact killed 3 slaves strapped into the forward restraint cage. Their bodies burst against the shock webbing, painting the interior in blood and bone splinters. The torpedo's melter ring burned white. Armor ran like wax. Breach charges detonated inward. Mordrin was first through the hole. The corridor beyond was narrow, ribbed with pipes, ammunition rails, and sacred warning plates. Red-robed engineers scattered before him. Skitarii vanguard turned as one, galvanic rifles rising, their movements precise and insectile. Binharic bursts snapped across the deck vox. Rad haze shimmered around them. Their brass masks reflected Mordrin's bulk as he advanced through the smoke. Breach established, he voxed. Corridor density acceptable. The first Skitarii volley sparked across his plate. Radium rounds burst against ceramite, licking poison into the air. Mordrin's autocannon answered. The corridor became a slaughter tube. Shells punched through metal torsos and meat remnants, through bionics and robes and rib cages braced with steel. Skitarii bodies came apart in disciplined pieces. One lost both legs and continued firing from the deck until Mordrin stamped down and flattened its skull mask into the grate. Behind him came the breachers, shields locked edge to edge, combi bolters barking through firing slits. A meltergun team stepped forward and turned a sealed bulkhead into running light. On the other side waited armsmen and cargo servitors with industrial cutters. Chain axes met bionic limbs in a shower of sparks. Bolt shells detonated men against bulkheads. A servitor swung a loading claw through an Iron Warrior's pauldron and died when Kordak drove a chain blade into its abdomen, chewing upward until oil, vat muscle, and preserved organs slopped onto the deck. Left, Mordrin voxed. A squad of Mechanicus Secutors emerged from an ammunition lift, their arc weapons whining. Mordrin pivoted before his targeting runes finished marking them. His autocannon fired in controlled bursts. The first Secutor's chest vanished. The second lost its weapon arm and half its spine. The third discharged an arc blast that danced across Mordrin's armor and killed 2 slaves behind him by boiling the fluid in their eyes. Mordrin did not slow. A breacher shield locked beside him. Kordak's voice hissed over the vox. "You are bleeding again." Mordrin glanced at his gauntlet. The seam across his palm had opened beneath the armor glove. Dark blood had leaked through a joint seal and down the autocannon's grip. It does not impede function. It contaminates the grip. The grip functions. Kordak said nothing. He killed a fleeing engine seer with a bolt through the back. They drove deeper into the arc. The fighting became close, metallic, and ugly. There was no glory in it, no noble exchange of fire across an open field, no banners in the wind. There were corridors filled with muzzle flashes, bodies trampled into paste, alarms screaming in technolingua, and the constant clatter of spent casings across grated floors. Iron warriors advanced by angles and pressure. Breaches pinned defenders. Havocs reduced hardpoints. Warpsmith thralls cut through sealed doors. Slaves dragged ammunition sleds behind them until they were shot, crushed, or forgotten. Mordrin killed with mechanical certainty. A tech priest Dominus confronted them in a shrine junction lined with rotating shell racks. The priest's body was a tower of robes, weapon limbs, incense burners, and polished augmetics. He raised a Volkite weapon and spoke in Binharic wrath. "Abominable traitor flesh. The Omnissiah rejects your corrupted pattern." Mordrin aimed. The Omnissiah is a corpse with better tools. The autocannon burst, took the priest apart from the center outward. His reactor pack ruptured, his robes ignited, his mechanical limbs continued fighting for several seconds after. The body was gone, twitching and firing at random until Kordak hacked them apart. Blood spattered across the shell racks. A captured Skitarius, pinned beneath a fallen ammunition loader, watched the droplets hit the brass casings. Its ocular implants flickered. Its vox grill clicked out a stream of code no loyal Forge Temple had ever sanctified. Mordrin passed without looking at it. Malagrax Nethor came after the fighting. He moved through the cleared corridors surrounded by servo skulls and vat thralls, collecting what others ignored. A smear on the deck, a fleck on a shell casing, a clotted ribbon from Mordrin's gauntlet. His mechadendrites plucked blood from iron with devotional delicacy. He placed samples into glass files that steamed from within. One file he opened above a vat servitor dragged from the Ark's Medici stores. The thing had once been a man, perhaps a dock worker, perhaps a criminal, perhaps merely unlucky. It hung from hooks while tubes pumped grey fluid through its abdomen. Nethor let Mordrin's blood fall into the servitor's chest cavity. For 3 breaths, nothing happened. Then the servitor screamed through a vox grill never designed for fear. Its ribs arched outward, flesh split along surgical seams. A pistol barrel pushed through the meat beside its sternum, small, black and slick. The barrel twitched blindly. The servitor's hands clawed at the air. Its eyes rolled under milky film as its internal organs rearranged around the intrusion. Nethor watched without pity, without excitement visible to any human eye, though his vox emitted a low Binharic hymn. "Contribution accepted," he said to the screaming thing. "Your inefficiency has ended." The pistol barrel coughed once. A malformed round struck the floor and shattered into wet fragments. Nethor sealed the chamber and sent the results to Dral. The warsmith received the report in the captured Ark's command chapel. Iron warriors stood around him while dead crewmen hung from data thrones, their cranial plugs still sparking. Outside the armoured viewports, Varadon Secundus glowed with furnace light and orbital traffic. A lieutenant asked, "Shall the infected slaves be purged?" Dral read the data scroll. "No. They may spread contamination through the holds. That is the purpose. Wasteful warsmith. We need labour for extraction." Dral looked at him then. Every warrior in the chamber became still. "Waste is matter without purpose," he said. "Their purpose has begun." So infected slaves were sealed into weapon lockers. Some were locked in with laser guns, some with knives, some with crates of bolt shells, some with empty racks to test whether absence sharpened hunger. Their screams lasted for hours. In several lockers, the screaming became laughter. In others, it became the sound of men chewing metal because they could not bear the space between their flesh and the weapons around them. The Ark's lower ammunition decks fell first. It began among mortal crew ordered by Iron Warriors to haul captured stores toward the boarding breach. One crewman struck another over a lasgun. Not for survival, not to resist. He wanted to hold it. He needed to hold it. His victim bit through his wrist rather than release the weapon. A third man pressed a pistol against his own chest, sobbing that it was trying to get home. When overseers lashed them, the crew turned on one another with claws, teeth, loading hooks, and broken magazines. By the time Kordach led a purge team into the deck, the corridor was packed with dead men and living ones trying to push weapons into wounds. One had split his abdomen open and stuffed laspacks into the cavity. Another had forced a bayonet through his palm and stared in wonder as the flesh tightened around it. A third crawled across the floor, dragging a crate of bolt rounds fused to his chest by strips of raw skin. Kordach burned them all. Mordrin watched the Pict feed in silence. Around him, the Graven Anvil's warriors muttered with unease they would never admit as fear. "They are weak," Mordrin said. Kordach glanced at him. "They are infected." Same conclusion. The Ark was taken before the system fully understood it was under attack. But Varadon Secundus was not defenseless. In the command bunker beneath Hive Moon Barraspine, Colonel Sarn Holst of the Varadon Steel cohorts stood before a tactical wall while alarm bells shook, dust from the ceiling. He was old by guard standards, hard-eyed, clean-shaven, and wrapped in a greatcoat stiff with ash and command seals. His left hand was augmetic from wrist to elbow. He had lost the real one to an orc chainblade on a world whose name no longer mattered. He trusted artillery more than courage, and maps more than hope. Reports came in as static, panic, and death. Ammunition arc compromised. Portside docks silent. Skitari confirmation pending. Unknown traitor Astartes' presence. Possible contamination event. Holst listened until the officers finished speaking over one another. Then he pointed at the tactical wall. Void mines awake across the inner lanes. Trench belts on Barraspine and Gathalamore to full readiness. Lehman Russ squadrons into hull-down positions along refinery approaches. Basilisk batteries loaded with Earthshaker shells and chemical munitions. Penal battalions into contaminated docks. An aide hesitated. "Sir, the penal cohorts have no sealed war gear." Holst looked at him. "Then they will discover the enemy's method of killing." "For the Emperor," another officer whispered. Holst did not echo him. Faith was useful in trenches and funerals. In a command bunker, he preferred ammunition counts. "Signal the forged temples," he said. "Tell them their ark is lost. Tell them if they attempt retrieval without my clearance, I will shell their docks myself. They will object. They may submit their objection in writing to the first shell." On the captured ark, the Iron Warriors prepared for withdrawal. Ammunition sleds moved through the corridors. Slaves dragged crates over blood-slick decks. Dark Mechanicum adepts tagged infected zones. Nethor's servo skulls drifted after Mordrin like carrion birds following a tank column. Mordrin ignored them. He stood in the breach corridor where the first Skitari had died. His armor was scarred, his ammunition belt half spent, his palm sealed again beneath the gauntlet. No mutation marked him. No weakness slowed him. No fever clouded his mind. He believed himself unchanged. His autocannon rested in his hands, warm from use. He looked down at it. The weapon's casing vibrated, barely enough to register through ceramite. A machine spirit's purr, perhaps. Recoil memory, heat fatigue, nothing more. Mordrin tightened his grip. Words came to his mouth before he considered them. Quiet, possessive, almost devotional. "You are mine," the gun spirit answered through recoil. Gathalamore Tertius did not fall by assault. Warsmith Kargan Droll had no patience for the wasteful pageantry of glory. He did not gather his warriors beneath banners and hurl them at the Hive Moon's walls to satisfy the shrieking appetites of lesser gods. He did not promise blood to Khorne, rot to Nurgle, excess to Slanesh, or change to the Changer of Ways. He did not kneel. He calculated. The Hive Moon hung above Varadon Secundus, like a blackened gear torn from some impossible engine, its surface armoured in manufactorum belts, ash planes, defence lasers, macro flak towers, orbital bastions, and trench rings so vast that they were visible from low orbit as scars carved across the world's skin. Kill satellites moved in solemn procession around it, each one a shrine to human fear and industry. Cargo elevators rose from its furnace continents into the void. Defense platforms tracked the graven anvil from behind veils of static and machine prayer. Beneath the crust, millions of conscripts waited in bunkers, hab warrens, firing trenches, shrine vaults, manufactorum galleries, munition pits, and sealed command cells. They had been told the Emperor protected. Dral intended to educate them. First, he starved the moon. The graven anvil and its attendant hulks cut the outer supply lanes with minefields, false distress beacons, and boarding strikes against transport convoys. Promethium tankers burned in silence. Grain barges vented their cargo into the void. Munition haulers were taken, stripped, and turned into drifting traps. Refugee craft were allowed to flee just far enough to spread panic through the orbital cordon before Iron Warrior's gunners reduced them to expanding clouds of metal and meat. Then Dral blinded it. Dark Mechanicum scrap code flooded the lesser Auspex arrays. Servo skulls seeded with corrupted machine cant drifted into sensor shadows and sang lies to the defense. Cogitators. Kill satellites fired on empty space. Macro flak towers wasted ammunition on phantom dropcraft. A whole quadrant of orbital lenses stared faithfully at an image of the graven anvil that had never existed. Then he mapped it. Every shell fired by the defenders revealed a gun. Every gun revealed a battery. Every battery revealed a supply route. Every supply route revealed a weakness. Warsmith Dral watched the moon become a diagram of its own death. Only then did he begin to break it. Mordrin descended through ash fog in the belly of a drill-clawed assault lander, standing among havocs, breachers, ammo thralls, and chained slave sappers. His autocannon rested across his chest, belt feed locked into the ammunition drums mounted across his back. Missile launchers hung from the harness racks beside him. Heavy bolters growled in the hands of his brothers. Lascannons slept in magnetic clamps. Combi bolters clicked as their machine spirits tasted the air through brass teeth and ancient rage. Chain blades hung from armor hooks. Crack grenades lined belts and bandoliers. Breaching charges rested in the arms of slaves whose eyes had been sewn open so they would not blink at the moment of detonation. Teleport homers pulsed beneath rune covers. Corrupted Auspex arrays chattered in static, reading heat, fear, ammunition stores, and the slow thunder of mortal hearts beneath the surface. Mordrin heard all of it, not with his ears. His helm heard the lander's engines, the scraping of ceramite, the wet breathing of slaves, the muttered oaths of mortal crewmen, the distant percussion of orbital artillery. His armor passed the data. His visor painted descent vectors and target runes. Yet beneath all of that, under signal and engine noise and vox chatter, the autocannon kept count. Not in words, in hunger. The seam across his palm had opened twice since the taking of the ammunition arc. It closed each time without clotting. He had reported nothing. There had been no loss of function, no weakness, no tremor, no fever. If anything, his grip had improved. The weapon no longer rested in his hands. It belonged there. His fingers found the grip with the intimacy of a lock accepting the only key that mattered. Kordak stood beside him, his helm tilted slightly toward Mordrin's ammunition feed. Your loading rhythm changed. Mordrin did not turn. It improved. I did not say it worsened. Then you spoke without utility. The lander shook as flak burst around it. A slave sapper vomited into his rebreather and choked on it. No one moved to help him. A breacher stepped on the dying man's chest to brace himself against turbulence. Bone cracked. The slave died with his eyes open and filth behind his mask. Kordak looked away from Mordrin and toward the assault ramp. Outer trench rings ahead. Mordrin's visor filled with the tactical feed. Drainage culverts below the western manufactorum belt. Secondary trench networks beyond. A broken causeway leading toward the lower refinery gate. Imperial armor held in reserve behind ash berms. Infantry concentrations dense enough to be useful. Artillery emplacements identified, not yet silenced. Dral's voice entered the command vox, cold as void iron. No banners, no liturgies, no challenges. Infiltration elements advance through drainage culverts. Havocs will establish reduction nests along the outer ring. Breachers will mark artillery shelters. Slaves will clear mines. Waste nothing that can be made to serve. A different voice entered the channel. Mortal, strained, loyal, Imperial Vox traffic bleeding through the corrupted bands. For the throne, hold grid 9. Repeat, hold grid 9. Artillery command confirms fire mission. All companies stand fast, no retreat without commissarial sanction. An iron warrior somewhere in the channel laughed once, a sound like a blade dragged across stone. The throne is a corpse chair, Kordak voxed. Your grid is already dead. The assault lander hit ground. The ramp blew down into a storm of ash, lasfire and screaming. Mordrin moved. The first phase was silenced by Iron Warrior standards. No roar of engines, no shouted oaths, no glorious charge. Squads entered the drainage culverts beneath the shattered manufactorum fields, wading through chemical runoff, corpse fat, rust sludge, and warm industrial waste. The tunnels were cramped for legionaries in warplate, their pauldrons scraped walls, their weapons knocked sparks from pipework. Slaves went first, crawling on hands and knees with mine probes and breaching satchels. Some vanished beneath the sludge when sump predators or defense servitors took them. Others found pressure mines by becoming red mist. Mordrin's squad advanced without slowing. In the dark, his weapon felt lighter than it should have. The autocannon should have been awkward in the culvert, too long for tight corners, too hungry for confined advance. It was not. He angled it before he knew the corner was there. He raised it before Auspex confirmed movement. Twice he fired through pipe walls and killed defenders waiting beyond them. The rounds passed through rusted iron, steam, and darkness, then found throats, spines, and ammunition packs. Kordak stopped after the second kill. Auspex did not mark them. No. You heard them. No. Then how? Mordrin stepped over a slave whose legs had been cut off by a hidden blade trap. They were there. They breached the outer trench ring during the artillery saturation. The Graven Anvil's guns spoke from orbit. Earthshaker batteries taken from prior wars answered from the ash plains. Shells came down in staggered patterns, not to destroy everything, but to compress defenders into pre-selected pockets. Imperial trenches collapsed in segments. Bunkers lost roofs. Vox masts fell like snapped bones. Macroflak towers fired blindly into the smoke until Lascanon teams marked them and burned out their ammunition feeds. Mordrin emerged from a drainage mouth into a trench already filled with corpses. Some were dead from shelling. Some were dying. Some had their rebreathers torn away and clutched at throats swelling from ash and chemical fog. A guardsman raised a laser with shaking hands. Mordrin saw him and did not see a man. He saw laser meat. The thought came cleanly, perfectly, without cruelty, without anger. The man existed as a brief alignment of flesh and weapon. The laser gave him shape. Without it, he was only matter, waiting to be pressed flat into the trench floor. Mordrin fired once. The shell struck the laser first, detonating the power cell, blowing the guardsman's hands apart and driving fragments of his own weapon into his face. The body fell. Mordrin stepped over it. The trench-to-trench killing lasted for hours. Imperial defenders fought hard. Mordrin gave them that much. They fired from revetments and firing steps, dragged heavy stubbers through mud, reloaded under bombardment, and died with prayers trapped behind cracked teeth. Commissars shot men who fled, then were themselves cut down by heavy bolter fire. Vox operators screamed coordinates until shrapnel turned their lungs into liquid. Medici orderlies crawled through the filth, pulling the wounded by their harnesses, only to be pulped beneath collapsing parapets. The Iron Warriors answered with method. Breachers locked shields and advanced by sections. Havocs established kill lanes across trench mouths. Crack grenades blew open dugouts. Chain blades finished whatever still moved inside. Combi bolters hammered command niches until no voice remained to give orders. Missile launchers cracked bunker embrasures. Lascannons cut through armored shutters and vaporized the crews behind them. Slaves dragged ammunition crates forward until they died. Other slaves were ordered to drag both crates and corpses aside. Mordrin fired through smoke, dust, ash, bodies, and wreckage. His Auspex stuttered under interference. It did not matter. He stopped checking it. Every time he raised the autocannon, there was already a target. A visor slit, a knee joint, a throat above a breastplate. A fuel line beneath a chimera hull glimpsed through half a dozen running men, the flexing wrist of an officer about to throw a grenade, the tiny gap between a Sentinel pilot's cockpit seal and the armor strut. Every shell found something that had not yet understood it was dead. His brothers noticed. Good reduction, voxed Brother Halvorn, after Mordrin cut down an entire fire team through the smoke of a burning Prometheum sump. Acceptable, Mordrin replied. More than acceptable, Halvorn said. You marked them without sight. They were poorly placed. They were invisible. Then they were poorly invisible. Kordak gave a low grunt that might have been amusement. Mordrin felt only irritation, not at praise. Praise had no mass, no function. He was irritated because the autocannon could not fire faster. The weapon bucked and roared, but there was delay between impacts, microseconds, meaningless to mortals, offensively slow to the hunger beneath his palm. The Imperial counterattack came at dusk, though the moon's sky was so choked with ash that dusk was only a darker shade of ruin. Colonel Sarn Holst committed armor along the Manufactorum Causeway exactly as Dral had predicted and slightly earlier than Dral had preferred. Chimeras rolled through smoke with infantry clinging to their hulls. Sentinels stalked between them on piston legs, multi-lasers flashing. Leman Russ battle tanks advanced behind, their cannons roaring, their dozer blades pushing bodies and debris from the causeway. Penal battalions ran ahead in ragged waves, shock collars sparking at their throats, mine poles and laser clutched in bloody hands. The Imperial Vox bled through again, harsh with static. Gathalamor command to all forward elements, hold the causeway. For the throne, hold grid 9, armor support inbound, basilisk fire walking east by northeast. Do not yield, do not yield. Mordrin stood amid the broken remains of a Manufactorum gatehouse with Havoc squads to either side. Behind them, breachers dragged wounded brothers into cover. Ahead, the causeway was a straight line of cracked ferrocrete, burning vehicles, advancing armor, and running men. Kordak locked a missile into his launcher, armor density high. Finally, Mordrin said. The first Chimera died to a Lascannon beam that punched through its engine block and turned the troop compartment into a furnace. Men spilled from the rear hatch, burning and screaming. Mordrin fired into them because several still held laser guns. The second Chimera slewed sideways after a crack missile blew off its track. Penal troops swarmed around it, not brave enough to advance, not free enough to retreat. A commissar stood on the hull and pointed his sword forward. Mordrin's shell took his elbow first, then his jaw, then the fuel drum behind him. A sentinel bounded through the smoke, its pilot swinging the multi-laser toward the Havoc line. Mordrin saw the machine and saw not walker, not pilot, not enemy, a moving mount. He fired into the hip actuator. The sentinel folded sideways, its cockpit smashed against the causeway. The pilot lived long enough to crawl halfway out before Kordak's missile turned him and the wreck into shrapnel. The Leman Russ came next. It rolled through the burning smoke like an altar to stubbornness, battle cannon rising, heavy bolters hammering, hull Lascannon cutting a line through the gatehouse wall. Its commander was visible for the span of one heartbeat in the cupola, helm lenses glowing red, one gloved hand raised to direct fire. Mordrin saw him, a shell waiting for its barrel. The thought pleased him, though he did not know why. The battle cannon fired. The world became impact. The gatehouse exploded inward. Halvan vanished beneath falling rockcrete. Two slaves became paste across Mordrin's greaves. Kordak staggered, armor scorched, missile launcher cracked along the casing. Mordrin remained standing. His autosenses screamed warnings. Dust killed visibility. Vox traffic collapsed into static. Men ran between him and the tank, Imperial infantry surging around the Leman Russ in a desperate push. A Chimera burned to his left, vomiting black smoke across the causeway. 3 bodies crossed his line of fire at once, a guardsman stumbling with his face torn open, a penal trooper dragging a mine pole, and an Iron Warrior's slave trying to flee rearward with his shock collar sparking. Behind them, through smoke and ash and the briefest slit of vision, the Leman Russ commander dropped back into the turret. Mordrin raised the autocannon. Kordak voxed. No line. Mordrin fired. The first shell passed through the fleeing slave's chest and burst his spine outward. The second tore through the penal trooper's shoulder, deflected from the mine pole and continued spinning. The third punched through the guardsman's open mouth, exited through the back of his skull, crossed the smoke gap, entered the Leman Russ through the narrowing cupola slit, and detonated inside the turret ring. For half a breath, nothing happened. Then the tank died from within. The turret lifted on a column of flame. Ammunition cooked off in a chained thunder of internal blasts. The commander emerged in pieces, armor fragments and red matter spraying across the hull. The Leman Russ stopped, shuddered, and split along its side as fire burst from every seam. The Iron Warriors around Mordrin roared approval across the Vox. Not joy, not brotherhood, the harsh bark of killers acknowledging efficiency. Impossible shot! Halvorn voxed, somehow still alive beneath rubble. "Confirmed kill," Kordak said. His voice carried something colder than admiration. Mordrin lowered the autocannon. Deep in its receiver, beneath heat, oil, recoil, and the wet smear of his palm on the grip, something laughed. Not in words, in brass, in hunger, in the perfect rhythm of a weapon that knew the hand, and a hand that was beginning to forget it had ever been anything but a weapon. The second phase began when the sky opened and spat iron. Dreadclaw assault craft fell through the ash-choked heavens of Gathalamor Tertius like burning talons, their hulls rotating through curtains of flak and lasfire, their machine spirits shrieking through corrupted vox bands as they hunted landing vectors with predatory hunger. Around them descended heavier shapes. Armoured spearheads rode in on bulk landers, vindicators and predators locked into gravitic cradles, their hulls blackened by re-entry fire and old hatred. Behind them came the demon engines, not deployed so much as unleashed. Mauler fiends clawed across broken manufactorum roofs, their furnace hearts belching smoke, their metal limbs chewing rockcrete and corpses alike. Forge fiends dragged themselves through shell craters, ectoplasma maws glowing with caged suns, their handlers chanting scrap code from behind barricades of chained slaves. The hive moon answered with everything it still possessed. Macro flak towers hammered the descent lanes until the heavens became a storm of shrapnel. Defense lasers carved red wounds through the falling ash. Kill satellites, half blind and dying from Dark Mechanicum's scrap code, still managed to lance 2 Dreadclaws from the sky. One assault craft tumbled into a habspire and detonated with enough force to fold the tower in half. Another crashed into a Prometheum canal and vanished in a flower of burning fuel that rolled through the lower districts, consuming tenements, medici stations, and evacuation lines with equal indifference. Warsmith Dral watched the losses from the strategium of the Graven Anvil and marked them acceptable. The mid-level manufactorums were the next objective. Not the walls, not the command shrines, not the banners, the manufactorums. The Imperium could lose men for years and call it courage, but without presses, furnaces, conveyors, fuel lines, and ammunition stamps, courage became noise. Dral understood this. He had always understood it. A fortress did not die when its defenders died. It died when its systems no longer served. Mordrin dropped with Havoc elements into the Western Shell Works, a district of linked cathedral factories where tank ammunition was forged beneath stained glass icons of the Omnissiah. The assault claw struck through the roof of a loading basilica and came to rest embedded in the upper gallery, its petals unfolding into smoke, sparks, and screaming metal. Mordrin stepped out while the craft was still moving. Below him, the cathedral factory roared. It was a temple built for murder by men who denied they worshipped murder. Conveyor belts stretched in long black rivers between stamping presses. Molten metal poured from suspended crucibles into shell molds. Assembly claws descended from ceiling rails, lifting, cutting, sorting, and crushing without pause. Servo arms locked shell casings into place with ritual precision. Incense burners swung above ammunition hoppers, fighting a losing war against the stench of oil, hot brass, blood, and burned hair. Stained glass rose along the walls in vast, luminous panels, each one depicting the machine god as cog, flame, hand, eye, piston, and blade. Red-robed engine seers moved below those icons with weapons raised and Binharic hatred crackling from their vox grills. Skitari maniples formed firing lines between shell racks. Cataphren battle servitors rumbled forward on tracked platforms, torsion cannons and plasma culverins glowing with killing light. Engine seer kill teams carried arc mauls, radium pistols, and servo skull relays, their mechanical limbs clicking in prayer. The Mechanicus had not come to hold. Ground for glory, they had come to protect production. Mordrin respected that enough to kill them first. His autocannon rose before his helm finished painting the range. He fired down into the first Skitari line. The weapon bucked in his hands, and machine men came apart beneath the burst. Brass masks shattered. Red robes whipped backward around bodies whose organs had long ago been replaced by systems more useful than flesh. One Skitarius lost its upper torso and still discharged its galvanic rifle as it fell. A second crawled behind a shell press, Binharic cant spilling from a broken throat. Brother Kordak landed beside Mordrin, boots cracking tile, missile launcher already locked to his shoulder. Gun nests below, cataphrons behind the second conveyor line. I see them. You have not looked. Mordrin fired again. A shell passed between two moving assembly claws, through a curtain of steam and into the exposed plasma coil beneath a cataphron servitor's weapon mount. The servitor exploded in blue-white fire. Its chained pilot meat burned inside the chassis. The blast took 3 Skitarii with it and painted the nearest Omnissiah window with ash and fragments of augmetic spine. Kordak's silence lasted half a breath. Confirmed. The Iron Warriors descended by chains, grav lines and brute force. Breaches slammed into the lower floor behind shields. Havocs established firing perches among the broken galleries. Slaves dragged ammunition crates from the Dreadclaw until plasma fire turned them to steam. A Vindicator crashed through the western wall, its demolisher cannon roaring into a fortified tool shrine and reducing it to a crater filled with metal limbs. Then the cathedral factory sealed itself. Blast doors dropped over exit arches. Conveyor lanes reversed direction. Assembly claws abandoned their programmed duties and began sweeping across the floor like executioner beasts. Pressure locks hissed shut. Warning bells screamed in high Gothic and machine code. Somewhere in the factory's control sanctum, a tech priest had decided that containment mattered more than survival. The Iron Warriors were trapped inside. Mordrin approved. A battlefield with walls was a weapon with boundaries. Boundaries clarified function. The Mechanicus counterattack struck from 3 levels at once. Skitarii Rangers fired from overhead gantries. Vanguard advanced through the lower conveyors, their rad-saturated forms moving through steam like plague saints of iron. Cataphron destroyers crawled down loading ramps, plasma culverins pulsing brighter with every charge cycle. Engine seers drove combat servitors ahead of them, each flesh thing fitted with industrial saws, hydraulic claws, and implanted obedience shrines. "Hold the central press line," Kordak voxed. "Mordrin, left arc. Halvan, right arc. Breaches. Lock shields around the shell hoppers." Mordrin did not answer. He was already firing. The battle became mechanical slaughter. Conveyor belts dragged corpses into stamping presses, where tank shells and dead men were flattened together under descending iron blocks. Molten metal spilled across the floor after a Lascanon beam ruptured a crucible, turning the lower transept into a river of white heat. A Mauler fiend smashed through the eastern nave, seized a cataphron in its claws, and tore the servitor engine in half before plasma fire burned out one of its eyes. It kept fighting blind, guided by rage and the scent of electricity. Mordrin's ammunition belt ran hot across his back. Thralls tried to reach him with replacement drums, but the factory killed them before they crossed the floor. One was sliced in half by an assembly claw. Another fell beneath a conveyor and emerged as red paste mixed with shell lubricant. A third reached Mordrin's side, only for a radium round to burst through his throat and spray Mordrin's arm with arterial blood. The autocannon kept firing. The belt thinned. Mordrin saw the count diminishing in the corner of his visor. He adjusted. Shorter bursts, tighter fire, nothing wasted. A shell into a Skitarius knee joint, dropping the machine man into the path of a press. A shell into an engine seer's power pack, turning the priest into a brief sun. 2 shells into a cataphron's track assembly, pinning it long enough for Kordak's missile to crack its armored torso. Still, the count fell. A plasma culverin burst, struck the column beside Mordrin and showered him in molten stone. His armor screamed heat warnings. The autocannon's casing blistered beneath his grip. The seam across his palm tore open inside the gauntlet. Pain came. Sharp, clean, useful. He looked down. Black cables had emerged from the autocannon's grip. They were not wires from the weapon. They were not tubes from his armor. They had grown from somewhere between both, slick and muscular, burrowing through the joints of his gauntlet and into the meat beneath. His ceramite glove had split along the palm, skin open beneath it. The cables pushed deeper, threading through tendons, curling around bones, drinking blood as if blood were oil. Mordrin gripped the weapon with his other hand and pulled. The autocannon did not move. He pulled harder. Servos whined, armor fiber bundles strained, his wrist bones creaked, the cables tightened, his palm split wider. Something inside his forearm shifted with a wet metallic click. An agony climbed his nerves like fire on a fuse. He almost tore his own bones loose. Then he fired. The shell struck a Skitarii Alpha through the throat and severed the spinal bionics behind the mask. The shot had been perfect, more perfect than before. The pain sharpened the path between sight and impact. It burned away thought. It removed hesitation. The weapon drank from the wound, and the wound gave the weapon certainty. Mordrin stopped pulling. Kordak saw him. "Your weapon is fused." Mordrin fired again. "It functions. It is in your arm. It functions better." The ammunition belt ran dry. The last shell entered the receiver. Mordrin felt it go, not through his eyes, not through the counter, but through the new cables rooted in his flesh. He felt the empty link. He felt the absence like thirst. A Cataphron destroyer rumbled into view across the press line, plasma culverin fully charged, its dead pilot face hanging slack inside a cradle of cables. The autocannon should have clicked empty. Instead, Mordrin's palm convulsed. Meat swelled around the receiver. The split in his gauntlet widened. Something hard pushed through the red-black tissue gathered at the side of the weapon. A shell emerged into the feed path, malformed, slick and steaming. Its brass casing glistened with marrow. Its explosive charge pulsed faintly under translucent metal like an organ behind skin. Tiny faces, too small to belong to any sane creature, seemed etched around the shell tip, mouths open in silent pleading. The weapon chambered it. Mordrin fired. The shot did not sound like a gunshot. It sounded like birth under pressure. The shell crossed the factory floor, hit the Cataphron's plasma weapon, and detonated with enough force to tear the servitor engine apart in a burst of blue flame and wet metal. Fragments hammered the stained glass above, cracking the Omnissiah's face into a web of broken light. Another shell pushed from the meat around the receiver. Then another. Then another. Each one hurt. Each one was better. Mordrin laughed once, though the sound startled him because he had not chosen it. High above the battlefield, a servo skull watched from the ribs of a shattered saint statue. Its lens focused on Mordrin's arm, on the cables, on the meat growing around the autocannon's receiver, on the shells emerging from flesh that had never known how to manufacture ammunition until the virus taught it memory. The feed reached Malagrak's Nethor aboard the graven anvil. The Magos stood in his laboratory surrounded by sealed weapon lockers, screaming test subjects and vat servitors nailed into examination frames. Streams of data spilled across the chamber walls. Blood samples rotated in glass reliquaries. Scraps of Mordrin's gauntlet skin twitched in suspension fluid. The Magos watched the image of the new shells forming and emitted a burst of Binharic praise so intense that two nearby servo skulls overloaded and fell smoking to the floor. "Not biological," Nethor whispered through his brass mask. "Not mechanical, not demonic alone. Warp-mediated union, flesh, machine, violent intent. Appetite instructs matter, armament instructs flesh." The heretic Astartes form was merely the first acceptable chassis. A vat thrall whimpered on the table beside him. Its chest had been opened. A pistol barrel had grown between its ribs during the last experiment and was now twitching whenever Mordrin fired. Nethor placed a clawed hand on the thrall's shaking head. "Do not fear. You are witnessing usefulness." Below the graven anvil's laboratory, in the captured ammunition decks and slave holds, the infected mortals had already stopped fearing. They had begun worshipping. They could not become what Mordrin was becoming. Their bodies lacked gene-wrought strength, black carapace, altered organs, transhuman resilience. The virus passed through them like a god through rotten wood, leaving splinters, smoke, and madness. Yet they adored the splinters. They gathered around weapon racks in the dark and whispered prayers into barrels. They hammered auto-pistols into their thighs with work mallets. They carved crude loading ports into their abdomens and tried to feed themselves shells. One nailed a lasgun to his forearm and died smiling when the power cell burst. Another forced a knife through his palm and wept because the flesh closed around it. They called Mordrin the first barrel. They called the wound holy. They called ammunition flesh that had remembered its purpose. No overseer stopped them. Dral had ordered observation, not mercy. On Gathalamor Tertius, Colonel San Holst watched the cathedral factory feed from a command bunker that shook beneath bombardment. The picked quality was poor. Static rolled through it. Mechanicus encryption corrupted the edges. Still, he saw enough. He saw an iron warrior whose gun did not stop firing. He saw shell counts become meaningless. He saw Skitarii gun lines reduced by a weapon that fed from the body of the warrior carrying it. Around him, officers argued over reserves, artillery lanes, contaminated districts, and the failing Western manufacturing belt. A young major pointed at the wall map with a shaking hand. "If we commit the 7th and 9th Armor Companies here, sir, we can sever the traitor spearhead from the refinery causeway." Holst did not look away from the picked feed. "How much ammunition does the enemy Havoc carry?" The major blinked. "Unknown. Estimate standard heavy load plus captured reserves." "No." "Sir?" Holst finally turned. His face looked older than it had 1 hour before. "He is firing without supply." The bunker fell quiet except for the rumble of distant guns. "That is impossible," said an artillery captain. Holst watched another burst from Mordren's autocannon erase a Mechanicus firing line. "The enemy has brought us many impossible things. Most can be shelled, some can be burned. A soldier who does not need ammunition changes attrition." "Orders, sir?" Holst looked back to the map. "Seal the western shell works. Fire on our own manufacturums if the line fails. No withdrawal through the mid-level ducts without flame cleansing. No captured weapons recovered without quarantine. Any unit reporting flesh metal contamination is to be destroyed at range." A priest began to object. Holst silenced him with a glance. "The Emperor does not require infected weapons," he said. "He requires obedience." Inside the cathedral factory, Mordren fed his blood into the autocannon. The Skitarii had formed another gun line beneath the shattered stained glass, their movements synchronized by a surviving data tether. Rangers knelt in front. Vanguards stood behind. Cataphron destroyers anchored the flanks. Plasma culverins charged. Arc rifles sparked. Galvanic weapons rose in unison. Their vox grills emitted a hymn of the Omnissiah, cold and precise, a machine prayer for the extinction of corrupted flesh. Mordren stepped onto a conveyor belt, slick with bodies and shell grease. His fused arm throbbed. The cables had grown deeper, past the wrist, into the forearm. Ceramite plates bowed outward around swelling tissue. Blood ran down the autocannon's casing and vanished into its seams. Each new shell tore something from him. He felt veins become feed lines. He felt skin become loading flaps. He felt pain become aim. The Skitarii fired. Rounds struck him. Radium bursts cracked across his chest. Plasma heat washed over his left pauldron and melted hazards striping into black slag. Arc fire crawled over the weapon and down into his arm. He smelled his own flesh cooking inside the plate. He did not fall. The autocannon fired. One shell ruptured a ranger's skull mask. Another punched through 2 torsos and buried itself in a plasma cell behind them. A third entered a vanguard's open vox grill and detonated down the throat. Mordren swept the weapon across the line, but it was no longer a sweep. It was selection. Every recoil opened him wider. Every burst made more ammunition. The gun did not empty. It multiplied. The sound filled the cathedral factory until the stamping presses seemed to follow its rhythm. Birth, impact. Birth, impact. Birth, impact. Machine men burst apart. Augmetic limbs spun across the conveyor belts. Red robes became wet flags. Brass masks cracked and vanished. Cataphron tracks snapped under precision fire. Plasma weapons detonated in their cradles. A whole section of the gun line disappeared behind a chain of blue-white explosions. The Omnissiah's broken glass face rained down over them all in glittering shards. Kordak's voice cut through the vox. "Mordren, cease fire. Line broken." Mordren kept firing. "Cease fire." He kept firing. There were no targets now. Only wreckage, only twitching limbs and sparking cables and bodies dragged under presses. Still the autocannon produced shells. Still his arm opened and sealed and opened again. Still the receiver drank blood. Still the weapon demanded answer to the hunger it had taught him to hear. Kordak stepped close, missile launcher lowered. "Brother." The word reached Mordren dimly. Brother, an old category, less precise than weapon, less useful than target. He released the trigger. The factory rang with the absence of gunfire. Mordren stood amid steam, ash, molten brass, crushed dead, and falling glass. His fused arm smoked. The autocannon clicked once, settling against his flesh like an animal satisfied for now. Much later, after the cathedral factory was taken, after the blast doors were cut open from within, after iron warriors marked ammunition stores and dark mechanicum adepts collected samples from the dead, Mordren returned to the captured arming nave. He did not remove the weapon. He could not. He stood beneath the cracked image of the Omnissiah while slaves too, frightened to touch him, cleaned the floor around his boots. His helm remained locked. His fused arm hung slightly forward, the autocannon resting where it had always belonged and where it had never belonged until now. Sleep came while he was standing. In the dream, he had no hand, he had no arm, he had no armor, no scars, no hearts, no name. He was inside the weapon, looking out through the barrel. Beyond the muzzle, the universe waited in a perfect line. The first blade broke against Mordrin's breastplate. It snapped with a shriek of tortured adamantium, its teeth shearing away in a spray of sparks and hot fragments. One fragment struck the face of the mortal assistant holding the restraint chain and punched through his cheek. The man fell backward, hands clamped over the wound, making a wet little sound that no one acknowledged. Brother Savax looked down at the broken bone saw in his gauntlet. The Chaos Apothecary had cut gene seed from the dying beneath artillery fire. He had opened loyalist captains while their brothers still fought to reach them. He had rebuilt legionaries with dead men's organs and stolen augmetics, had sewn flayed nerves into demon flesh, had sealed screaming warriors into dreadnought sarcophagi, and called the result continued service. He had never needed patience. His trade was violation performed with certainty. Mordrin's armor denied him. The Havoc stood chained inside the surgical vault, locked upright by servo clamps, magnetized restraints, and chain hooks thick enough to drag a tank. His ancient Mark III plate was blackened from plasma scoring and caked with manufactorum ash. The autocannon remained fused to his right arm from gauntlet to elbow, the weapon's casing grown into split ceramite and dark tissue. Black cables pulsed beneath the armor plates, not lying atop them but vanishing into them, as if the weapon had sent roots through the shell of the warrior and found soil beneath. "Again," said Warsmith Dral. Savax discarded the ruined saw and took up a chain scalpel. The tool snarled to life, its teeth running in a bright silver blur. He placed it against the seam where Mordrin's breastplate should have opened. "There is no seam," Savax said. "There was. There is not." Dral stood beyond the surgical lamps, helm in place, servo harness folded behind him like the limbs of some waiting siege insect. Malagrax Nethor watched beside him, surrounded by servo skulls and twitching data tethers. Kordak lingered near the sealed doors with several armed iron warriors, not quite guarding Mordrin, not quite guarding everyone else from him. Mordrin said nothing. His helm was locked to his gorget. Savax had tried to release it first. The locking teeth had fused into a single ring of black metal. The release runes were still visible, but beneath the surface the mechanisms had become bone-hard and wetly alive. When Savax attempted to cut into the neck seal, the armor bled, not hydraulic fluid, not old coolant. Blood. It ran down the plate in thick lines and steamed where it touched the surgical table. The apothecary placed the chain scalpel against the breastplate and pushed. The teeth screamed. The armor opened by a finger's width, not because it had been cut, but because the pressure forced a wound into being. Beneath the plate, there was no clean separation between ceramite and flesh. Red muscle glistened against black iron. Bundles of cable moved like tendons. Ribbed armor fiber curled around bone. Mordrin's chest twitched under the wound, and the autocannon clicked once, low and hungry. Savax leaned closer. "It has integrated through the black carapace." Nethor's lenses brightened. "Say instead that the black carapace has accepted improvement." "Say nothing," Mordrin growled. His voice came through his helm vox in a deeper register than before. It carried static in the undertone, a clicking distortion like loose shells settling in an ammunition hopper. Savax drove the chain scalpel deeper. The breastplate closed around the blade. Metal and flesh pinched shut. The tool jammed. Its motor shrieked. Savax pulled, but the armor held. The wound sealed, not cleanly, but with a puckered ridge of glossy black material that rose around the trapped blade. It swallowed the teeth. It swallowed half the casing. Then the breastplate knitted itself shut, with the scalpel still buried inside, leaving only the handle protruding like the hilt of a knife in a corpse. The apothecary stared. Mordrin breathed once. The scalpel handle snapped off and fell to the floor. Dral turned his helm toward Nethor. "Assessment. Removal is no longer possible without terminating the subject." "Incorrect," Savax said. "Termination may not remove the armor either." Nethor emitted a soft Binharic trill. "Delightful." Mordrin strained against the chains. The servo clamps groaned. "I am not a subject." Dral stepped closer. The surgical lamps painted his armor in hard white reflections. You are whatever I designate. I am Iron Warrior. You were Iron Warrior. You are now warband property. The autocannon's feed teeth moved. No ammunition belt had been loaded into the weapon. The motion still sounded like hunger testing its jaw. Mordrin pulled against the restraints again. Chains tightened across his chest. One of the mortal assistants whimpered as a pressure gauge climbed into the red. I am not slave iron, Mordrin said. Dral looked up at him for a long moment. The Iron Warriors do not ask iron whether it wishes to become a wall. The words settled into the vault colder than any threat. Mordrin stopped straining, but not because he had accepted the truth. Acceptance was for men who had choices. He simply recorded Dral's position, Dral's distance, Dral's armor weaknesses, and the probable effect of sustained autocannon fire through the Warsmith's helm lenses. The calculations came to him before anger did. That troubled him, not enough to speak of it. The chains were released 3 watches later. Mordrin stepped down from the restraint dais and nearly fell. His left knee bent backward, not fully, not enough to cripple him, enough to make Kordak raise his combi bolter and Savax reach for a toxin injector. Mordrin's leg twisted beneath him with a wet metallic grind. Armor plates shifted. Something inside the knee joint split, reseated, and locked with a crack loud enough to echo from the surgical walls. Mordrin straightened. Pain flashed through him, then became data. His spine had thickened. He could feel it even through the armor. Each vertebra seemed heavier, reinforced, braced to bear the mass of the gun and the growing machinery of his right side. His shoulder no longer rotated cleanly. It locked forward, angled toward firing posture even when he tried to let the autocannon hang at rest. His gait had changed. He did not stride as an Astartes should stride. The old predatory efficiency was becoming something else. Slower, heavier, stabilized. A gun platform learning to walk. Kordak saw it. His helm tracked the change. You are impaired. Mordrin took another step. The left knee clicked. The autocannon shifted, finding balance. I advance. You limp. I advance. No one corrected him again. On Gathalamor Tertius, the Imperials collapsed inward. Colonel San Holst gave the order from a bunker whose ceiling shed dust with every orbital impact. His tactical wall showed the hive moon bleeding red at the edges, manufacturing belts lost, trench rings severed, western shellworks overrun, and mid-level gates compromised. The Iron Warriors had taken production districts and ammunition stores. Worse, they had taken time from the defenders, and time was the one resource Holst could not manufacture. Scorched earth protocols, he said. The officers around him did not move at first. Exhaustion had slowed even fear. Holst repeated himself. Scorched earth, inner hive fallback, blow manufacturing bridges, detonate ammunition stores before capture, seal compromised hab blocks. A major swallowed. His uniform was grey with dust. There are civilians in the East Hab stacks, sir. There are workers in the East Hab stacks, Holst said. Workers become infected. Infected become enemy material. Seal them. They will burn. They will obey the Emperor by burning. A Vox officer bent over his console, listening to reports through static. Skitari command requests access through Gate Kalthus for sample retrieval. Archmagos Vorg invokes Martian privilege. Holst's augmetic fingers clicked against the edge of the map table. Tell the Archmagos if his kill command crosses my fire lanes without coordination, they will be treated as hostile movement. The Vox officer hesitated. Holst looked at him. The officer transmitted the order. Across the hive moon, bridges died. Manufactorum spans collapsed into smoke-choked chasms. Hab block shutters sealed while men hammered on the inside. Ammunition vaults detonated in chained thunder, erasing whole districts rather than letting shells pass into traitor hands. Penal battalions were driven into contaminated corridors with flamers and prayer brands. The hive's inner walls closed, and millions learned that the Imperium's mercy had always been another name for triage. Aboard the Graven Anvil, Dral began his own protocols. 10 captured renegade Astartes were dragged into the testing vault. They had belonged to lesser warbands, pirates, oathbreakers, fools with skull trophies, and god-marked armor who had believed allegiance to chaos meant freedom. Dral had taken them during previous raids and kept them as bargaining meat. Now they had become more useful than ransom. They were chained in a circle around Mordrin. Some cursed, some laughed. One prayed to the blood god and promised skulls. Another pleaded to the Plague Father through swollen lips. None were Iron Warriors. That alone condemned them in Dral's eyes. Nethor's adepts opened Mordran's palm seam with hooked instruments. The wound parted eagerly. Blood welled up, dark and thick, threaded with metallic motes. Mordran watched the files fill. This is inefficient. Dral stood behind the circle. This is research. My blood is ammunition. Then we will fire it. The first renegade received the blood through an injector driven into the throat. He laughed for 4 heartbeats. Then his armor locked and crushed inward. His ribs broke. His hearts burst. He died foaming black fluid through his helm grill. The second tried to break his chains. His hands fused to them. The chains grew into his gauntlets and then into his bones. He screamed until his jaw snapped. The third bloated inside his plate. His armor split, spilling organs that had hardened into crude magazines. They clicked uselessly on the floor before Savax crushed them underfoot. One after another, the virus rejected them. 9 died screaming. The 10th survived long enough to change. He was a former Red Corsair, broad, scarred, still snarling defiance even as his body failed. The blood entered him, and for a moment he steadied. His helm turned toward Mordran. Laughter crackled over his vox. Your gift is weak, Iron Dog. Then his jaw dislocated. His faceplate bulged outward. Teeth shattered against ceramite. A tube of black metal forced itself through his mouth, splitting lips, tongue, gums, and vox grill together. The barrel lengthened with a wet grinding sound. Ammunition nodules swelled along his throat. The renegade made a sound that might have been triumph or choking. A grenade launcher had grown from his jaw. Nethor leaned close, ecstatic in silence. Partial compatibility. The renegade tried to fire. The weapon coughed. A malformed grenade rolled from the barrel, pulsing like an egg full of blood. Dral lifted his boot and crushed the renegade's skull against the floor before the grenade finished forming. Imperfect, the warsmith said. Mordran watched pieces of brain, metal, and ammunition jelly spread beneath Dral's heel. He felt no pity. He felt irritation that the mutation had failed to produce a clean firing cycle. The next offensive came under toxic fog. Archmagos Kyle Vorg had grown tired of human caution. His kill command advanced through the inner manufactorum approaches beneath shrouds of chemical mist and drifting ash. Skitarii Rangers moved in perfect formation, red robes hanging from metal limbs. Long rifles held at ritual angle. Vanguard maniples followed, their rad, saturated bodies poisoning the air around them. Behind them strode Castellan robots, hulking relics of the Legio Cybernetica, their fists heavy enough to pulp legionary plate, their shoulder weapons glowing with sanctified wrath. Engine seers marched between them, chanting Binharic prayers and carrying sealed sample reliquaries. Their objective was not to retake the line, it was to retrieve Mordran's blood. The Iron Warriors let them come through 3 kill zones before answering. Mordran stood at the center of the 4th, between shattered conveyor towers and burned hab shrines. His left knee had locked twice during the march. His brothers had slowed for him only because Dral ordered them to keep the asset within the line. No one called him brother now unless old habit forced the word out. The fog parted with red targeting beams. Skitarii rifles cracked. Heavy phosphor fire from the Castellans streaked through the murk. The first Iron Warrior beside Mordran took 3 shots through the chest and fell without sound. Breaches raised shields. Lascannons answered from the upper ruins. Missile trails carved brief tunnels through the chemical haze. Mordran raised the autocannon. Enemy sighted, Kordak voxed. Mordran looked at the advancing Rangers, their rifles aligned, their masks expressionless, their machine devotion cold and perfect. Target wants opening, he said. Kordak turned his helm toward him. Repeat, Mordran fired. Autocannon shells hammered the first Castellan robot. Its armor absorbed the impacts with sacred stubbornness, each shell detonating against ancient plating, blowing chunks of painted ceramite and blessed alloy away without halting its advance. Mordran adjusted. He fired into the knee actuator, then the elbow joint, then the sensor cluster. The robot staggered, still coming. Behind it, Skitarii Rangers recited Binharic catechisms, then the catechisms changed. The static began at the edge of their vox hymn. a clicking undertone, a counting rhythm. Several rangers faltered, almost imperceptibly. One lowered his rifle and looked at it as if noticing its weight for the first time. Another's Vox grill emitted a burst of corrupted machine code that made the nearest engine seer recoil. Vorg's command signal cut through the fog, harsh and layered with authority. Maintain noospheric purity. Reject hostile cant. Advance for sample acquisition. Mordrin's palm seam opened beneath the fused weapon. Blood entered the receiver. The autocannon fired faster. Plasma struck him from the left. A culverin blast from a cataphron hidden behind the robots washed across his torso and right shoulder, burning away old paint, old oaths, and layers of fused plate. Heat warnings drowned his visor. His armor split down the chest where Savax's trapped blade had vanished. For one instant, exposed matter glowed beneath the damage. Then the wound began to close, not with ceramite. The new plate grew outward, glossy and pale black, veined like diseased bone. It curved over the damage in overlapping ridges, wet at first, then hardening under the ash. It did not bear hazard stripes. It did not bear legion marks. It looked grown rather than forged. And, when it sealed, Mordrin felt it connect to his ribs. Kordak saw, Halvan saw, even the breachers busy behind shields saw. Something passed through the Iron Warrior's line. Not fear, exactly. Fear was for mortals. This was recognition. A gift had crossed the boundary into curse, and every traitor there knew the gods loved boundaries only because they could be broken. The Castellans reached close range. One swung a fist at Mordrin. He should have stepped aside with Astartes' speed. His left knee dragged, his shoulder locked. Instead of evading, his body braced. Stabilizer instinct drove his boots deeper into cracked flooring. The blow struck his pauldron and spun him half around, but he did not fall. He pushed the autocannon's muzzle against the robot's damaged sensor head. "I require impact," he said. He fired until the machine's head vanished. The Mechanicus kill command broke when the second Castellan fell, and the Rangers began shooting one another over dropped weapons. Several tried to seize shell casings from the mud. One Skitarius pressed a spent casing against its chest plate and repeated corrupted Binharik until Kordak burned it down with a combi melter. Vorg withdrew with 3 samples and less than half his force. Drál called that acceptable. Mordrin called it incomplete. After the battle, the Iron Warriors avoided him. They did it with discipline. No one stepped back in obvious cowardice. No one refused orders. They simply left more space around him in corridors. Armorers stopped offering maintenance. Slaves were ordered to place ammunition crates at a distance and retreat before he approached. Kordak spoke only on command channels. Savax watched him like a wound that had learned to watch back. Mordrin noticed all of it and understood none of it in human terms. Brothers were distances, slaves were motion, officers were vectors, enemies were openings, weapons were truth. He returned to the arming vault after the kill command's defeat. His old serf waited there. The man had served him for decades, long enough to know the weight of his ammunition, the preferred angle of his weapon rack, the rhythm of his maintenance rights. He was older now, scalp scarred by augmetic plugs. One eye filmed white from exposure to propellant fumes. Mordrin remembered breaking his wrist cycles before. The serf had survived. That had made him useful. The serf approached with a cloth soaked in sacred oil. His hands trembled, but habit carried him forward. "My lord," he said, "the weapon requires cleansing." Mordrin stood motionless. The serf touched the fused weapon hand, not the autocannon casing, not the armor. The hand beneath, where flesh, gauntlet, and gun had become one grievance of meat and metal. The world narrowed. There was no anger, no insult, no thought of punishment, only violation of firing integrity. A foreign pressure on a sacred feed path. Obstruction, contamination, interference. Mordrin's left hand closed around the serf's skull. The man had time to inhale. Mordrin squeezed. Bone failed first. Then the augmetic eye burst from its socket. Then the skull came apart inside the skin with a wet collapse, blood and grey matter spilling between Mordrin's fingers and down his wrist. The body kicked twice, heels scraping the deck. Mordrin let it fall. The corpse twitched beside the ammunition shrine. Mordrin looked down at it. The old part of him should have remembered the serf's function. Should have noted the loss of trained labour, should have calculated replacement cost. Instead, he watched the blood spread toward a fallen shell casing and felt only one clean need. Reload. The war did not remain upon Gathalamor Tertius. Wars bled. like wounds, like men, like empires. They spread through pressure, ignorance, fear, and the inability of commanders to kill fast enough. From the hive moon's manufacturum belts, the contagion travelled in ways no quarantine seal could fully forbid. It moved in ammunition crates dragged from burning shellworks. It moved in oil soaked into loader gloves. It moved in blood smeared across breech shields, in spent casings gathered by desperate armourers, in salvage stripped from dead Skitarii, in weapons taken from infected hands because the Imperium could not afford to leave a lasgun unused. The Imperium declared quarantine after the first moon fell silent. It was too late before the declaration finished transmitting. Refugee. Craft fled the lower docks of Gathalamor Tertius and were destroyed by naval picket fire, but not all of them died close enough to the moon. Some broke apart over refinery satellites. Some spilled cargo and bodies into orbital salvage lanes. Some were boarded by security teams who believed sealed armor and proper rights would suffice. Men carried weapons from dead men because weapons were sacred to the war effort, because no quartermaster wished to explain why usable arms had been abandoned, because fear of waste had always been one of the Imperium's most faithful executioners. Infected munitions reached Varadon Secundus, not enough to conquer, enough to whisper. A lasgun rack in a PDF armory sweated oil until the guards posted beside it began licking their fingers. A bolt pistol taken as evidence from a contaminated cultist misfired inside an arbitrator precinct and filled the holding cells with brass shavings and screaming. A crate of autopistols in a hive militia depot grew warm and wet around the locks. 3 men assigned to inventory them fought one another with their teeth to decide who would open it first. The virus did not think like plague alone. It did not hunger merely to live. It wanted union. It wanted the place where flesh ended and weapon began to become a lie. In Hive Lamentum, the lie found worshippers. The hive rose from the eastern industrial basin of Varadon Secundus, a stacked city of black habs, chimney towers, hanging refineries, conveyor bridges, and munition shrines. Its workers had spent generations assembling firearms they were forbidden to own. Fathers taught sons how to check lasgun capacitors, how to polish firing lenses, how to recite serial numbers and machine blessings, how to count bolt rounds without touching the primers. Men were born beneath the rhythm of stamping presses. They died beneath the rhythm of stamping presses. Between birth and death, they made weapons for armies they would never see, for wars they would never understand, under icons of the Emperor and the Omnissiah that watched but never thanked. When the first preacher of the new cult appeared, he wore a worker's apron soaked in lubricant and blood. He had nailed a stub pistol into the meat of his left palm. He stood atop an ammunition loader in the red gloom of Foundry Chapel Calthis and spoke to men whose lungs were black with smoke and whose hands had never been clean. "The gun is freedom," he said. "The barrel is truth. Flesh is only a temporary holster." The men listened. Not because the words were wise. Wisdom had no place in Hive Lamentum. They listened because the pistol in the preacher's palm twitched when he spoke, because the muzzle turned toward men who doubted, because his blood ran into the grip and did not fall. "The Imperium gives us iron and forbids us to become it," the preacher said. "The corpse throne takes our hands and gives us nothing. The weapon knows us. The weapon remembers us. Open yourselves and be loaded." The uprising began in the lower assembly halls. Workers seized lasguns from inspection racks. Overseers were beaten to death with unfinished rifle stocks. Munition clerks were strangled with purity seals. Servo skulls were smashed and their lenses pressed into open wounds as holy sites. Men carved loading ports into their own bellies. Men hammered knives through their forearms. Men fought over empty pistols, sobbing with gratitude when triggers cut their fingers. By the time Colonel Sarn Holst received the report, Hive Lamentum had already begun killing itself. He ordered containment. Inner bridges destroyed. Transit shafts sealed. Prometheum locks flooded. Loyal regiments redeployed from the Gathalamor front. Penal battalions pushed into the lower stack with flamers and shock mauls. PDF units ordered to fire into crowds without awaiting confirmation of infection. The crowds fired back. The grave-forged host came during the confusion. Dreadclaws struck the hive's upper armor skin while artillery batteries on captured moons hammered the outer defense pylons. Iron Warriors' breacher squads descended through smoke, fire, and falling masonry into the middle levels where cultists and loyalists were already murdering one another, room by room. Warsmith Drall did not seek to save the cult. He sought to exploit the breach it had opened. Mordrin descended with them. He no longer moved with the clean predatory stride of an Astartes. His left knee dragged and locked, then snapped forward with ugly force. His right shoulder had become a permanent firing brace. The autocannon fused to his arm from gauntlet to upper forearm, cables and meat vanishing beneath sealed Mark III plate. New armor growths had hardened across his chest where plasma had burned him, glossy black and veined like infected bone. His helm no longer turned as quickly as his weapon did. Sometimes his body followed the gun rather than commanding it. He carried no sidearm. That was no longer true by the time he reached the 3rd level. The battle inside Hive Lamentum was not a line. It was 1,000 cages stacked atop one another, each filled with smoke, terrified men, and gunfire. Hab stacks collapsed into one another after Iron Warrior's charges blew load-bearing walls. Promethium flooded stairwells and burned upward, turning evacuation ladders into chimneys lined with screaming bodies. Las fire cut through Hab doors, through prayer curtains, through the thin walls of worker cells where families had once slept in shifts. Civilians were ground beneath armored boots because no warrior on either side had room to step around them. Cultists came howling through manufactorum corridors with pistols nailed to their hands and bayonets jutting from their cheeks. Guardsmen met them with disciplined volleys until the cultists reached bayonet range, and then discipline became mud under boots. Mordrin's breaches advanced through a Hab cathedral whose pews had been replaced by assembly benches. Men in guard flak armor fired from the far transept. Cultists surged between both forces, attacking anyone who carried a weapon, not from allegiance but envy. Brother Kordak voxed from behind his siege shield. "Clear the nave!" Mordrin heard the order and looked across the bodies. A cultist ran toward him with a knife lodged through his own wrist, smiling around a mouthful of broken teeth. Mordrin's autocannon spat once and removed him from chest to crown. A guardsman knelt behind an overturned bench and fired a lasgun until Mordrin's next shell found the weapon's power cell and burst the man's arms off. A breacher beside Mordrin crushed a worker beneath his boot and fired into a side chapel where PDF troops were dragging a heavy stubber into position. A Chaos champion died near the altar. He was not Iron Warriors. His armor bore old marks cut away and replaced with jagged trophies. He had entered the hive with a pack of lesser renegades, hoping to claim cultists for himself. A plasma burst from an Imperial gun line struck him through the gorget and cooked his head inside his helm. He fell backward, bolt pistol still clutched in one gauntlet, weapon smoking, grip slick with his blood. Mordrin saw it. The pistol was well made, brutal, short-barreled, mass-reactive, worth retention. He stepped over the corpse and took it. The moment the pistol touched his left palm, his flesh opened, not like a wound from outside, like a mouth remembering speech. The pistol sank into him. Mordrin watched it disappear through his gauntlet and skin, as if the metal had turned molten and his hand had become wax. The grip went first, then the trigger guard, then the slide, then the barrel. There was no heat. There was pain, but the pain was distant, registered and accepted. His fingers closed around nothing. The weapon was gone. Kordak saw. "Mordrin!" "Retained," Mordrin said. "Explain." "Secondary function retained." A guardsman's crack grenade detonated nearby, blowing 3 cultists into meat and throwing one breacher against a column. The fight surged over the question and buried it. Hours later, inside a refinery stairwell filled with smoke so thick that even Astarte's auto-senses struggled, the bolt pistol returned. Mordrin's left wrist split. A muzzle pushed out through armor, skin, and blackened underlayer. The weapon formed from him with wet precision. Not the same pistol, not a copy, but a remembered function. A magazine grew beneath the wrist, clicking into place under the skin with a sound like teeth seating into a jaw. A guardsman emerged from the smoke with a meltagun raised at Mordrin's chest. Mordrin did not draw. He did not aim. The pistol in his wrist fired. The bolt round struck the guardsman beneath the chin and detonated inside the skull. The helmet lifted away on a fountain of blood and brain matter. The body fired the meltagun as it fell, beam cutting into the ceiling and bringing half the stairwell down in a rain of rockcrete and burning bodies. Mordrin stared at his wrist. The muzzle withdrew slowly. The wound closed around it, leaving only a dark circular scar in the gauntlet. Useful. At first, it was useful. A combat knife emerged from his elbow during a crush of cultists in a Hab corridor. It unfolded from between armor plates, black and wet, its edge serrated like a chain blade's memory. Mordrin drove the elbow backward without turning and opened a man from throat to pelvis. The blade slid back into him after the kill. Later, a stubber muzzle opened in his palm. He raised his hand toward a doorway before his mind formed the intention. The muzzle coughed a burst of crude rounds through the wood and into the militia beyond. Several fell screaming. One died trying to hold his intestines inside his body with both hands, while another man tripped over him and broke his neck on the threshold. Then came the magazines. They formed beneath Mordred's skin as hard rectangular shapes sliding through the meat. One clicked into place along his forearm, another shifted under his ribs, another pressed against his left hip from inside the armor. Each seating sound made his hearts hesitate. Each one made the weapon voices clearer. One wanted fire, one wanted recoil, one wanted armor penetration. One wanted the soft pop of skulls under mass reactive shells. Mordred began answering them. "Not yet," he told the pistol in his wrist. Kordak turned his helm. "Speak to command?" "No." "To whom, then?" Mordred looked down at the bodies in the corridor. Cultist, guardsman, worker, breacher slave. All opened, all emptied, all defined by what they had carried and how poorly they had used it. "The little guns," he said. Kordak did not reply. Far above the hive war, Inquisitor Malchus Venn arrived in system aboard the black ship Judgment Without Dawn. The vessel translated behind the Imperial cordon without warning, its arrival codes so ancient and absolute that naval captains who had been preparing to fire instead found themselves kneeling before their command thrones. Venn came down to Holst's bunker in a storm of authority, escorted by stormtroopers in sealed carapace and servo skulls bearing inquisitorial seals. He was tall, thin and severe, with a face like parchment drawn over iron. His eyes were augmetic silver. His rosette hung openly at his chest, not as ornament, but as weapon. Holst saluted because even colonels understood when survival depended on ritual. "My Lord Inquisitor." "Colonel Holst." "Situation." Holst gestured to the tactical wall. Hive Lamentum burned across half its levels. Gathalamor Tertius was red with breach markers. Orbital salvage zones blinked contamination warnings. The infection spreads through contact with blood, oil, munitions, possibly weapon handling. Chaos forces exploit cult uprisings. Mechanicus retrieval efforts have compromised containment. We have destroyed 3 refugee convoys, 5 salvage craft, and 2 of our own armor depots. Venn watched the map without blinking. "And the Astartes carrier." Holst's jaw tightened. "Confirmed. Traitor havoc. Iron warriors. The thing produces ammunition. Now secondary weapons. We have Picts." Venn reviewed them. He watched Mordred's wrist birth a bolt pistol. He watched a knife slide from the elbow. He watched a palm muzzle open and fire. He watched cultists kneel before weapons while guardsmen burned them. He watched men become holsters for their own doom. "This is not plague," Venn said. Holst said nothing. "It is not merely mutation. It is a weapons system, a self-sustaining heavy infantry vector. Chaos has found a way to make logistics optional. That is impossible to sustain at scale." Venn looked at him. So was the first demon host. So was the first possessed warrior. So was the first traitor legion. The galaxy is full of impossible things that endured because someone delayed extermination by calling them impossible. A Vox adept approached, shaking. "My lord, Grey Knight's astropathic channel prepared." Venn turned away from the map. "Open it." The chamber lights dimmed as the secure transmission began. The air tasted of iron, incense, and psychic frost. The voice that answered was distant, armored, and controlled. "Speak your needs, servant of the throne. This is Inquisitor Malchus Venn, Ordo Malleus. I requisition chamber militant support. Confirmed chaos, techno-organic contagion. Warp-mediated armament mutation. Heretic Astartes carrier. Potential demonological escalation." A pause, then the voice answered. "Grey Knight's deployment requires certainty of demonic threat." Venn's mouth did not move, but something in his eyes hardened. "Certainty is for autopsies. Come before I must burn the system to ash." Another pause. "Be advised, if contagion spreads by touch or weapon contact, engagement protocols will be absolute. No relic recovery, no prisoner retention, no battlefield salvage. Accepted. Containment may include extermination of loyal forces. Accepted." Holst looked at Venn then. The Inquisitor did not look back. The voice continued. "We are the hammer. We will come." The transmission ended. In Hive Lamentum, Mordred climbed a mountain of dead. The lower assembly plaza had become a charnel pit. Cultists had charged Imperial lines to reach the weapons in their hands. Guardsmen had fired until their barrels overheated, then clubbed men down with empty lasguns. Iron warriors had advanced through both, firing, crushing, cutting, and marking no distinction once the melee swallowed formation. A Prometheum reservoir had burst somewhere above, sending burning fuel down through stairwells and lift shafts until the plaza steamed with boiled blood. Mordrin stood atop the mound. Dead cultists lay tangled with dead guardsmen. Penal collars blinked beneath intestines. Lasguns were clutched in blackened hands. Autopistols jutted from self-made wounds. Bayonets remained lodged in mouths, ribs, palms, and throats. A heavy stubber crew had died around their weapon. Each man's hands fused to some part of it, as if the gun had claimed them all in its final breath. Mordrin's autocannon smoked. His wrist pistols slept beneath sealed skin. The knife in his elbow twitched. The stubber in his palm murmured. Beneath his armor, magazines shifted and clicked, waiting for need. Kordach climbed behind him, armor splashed with ash and blood. "The plaza is ours." Mordrin looked across the dead. "Ours," he repeated. He tried to remember which corpses had been allies: cultist, guardsman, worker, slave, iron warrior thrall, penal trooper, armsman, preacher, breacher. The categories slipped. Weapons remained: lasgun, auto pistol, knife, stubber, bolt pistol, melter, grenade, chain blade, empty hands. Empty hands were waste. Mordrin raised his fused weapon and listened to the voices inside him argue over what the next kill should require. He could not remember who had stood with him. He remembered exactly what they had carried. The Plague Hulk came into Varadon Secundus, wearing dead ships as trophies. It translated from the warp without grace, without order, without anything resembling sane navigation. It tore into real space in a hemorrhage of green lightning and corpse light, dragging a wake of frozen bodies, broken escorts, rusted debris, and things that had once been asteroids before rot taught them to pulse. Its hull was swollen beyond the shape its shipwrights had given it. Decks bulged like infected organs. Gun batteries sagged in nests of corrosion and meat. Cathedral towers leaned under the weight of fungal growths. Bells tolled from its spine, though no atmosphere should have carried the sound.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Support really helps.
Every chime reached the vox bands of the Imperial blockade and made mortal crewmen retch blood into their rebreathers. Its name arrived before its identification codes, Maw of Kindly Ruin. Then came the Death Guard. Lord Morbus VII stood upon the command shrine of the Plague Hulk with his rusted bolter resting across both gauntlets. He was enormous even for a Plague Marine, bloated into the swollen silhouette of a walking disease shrine. His armor had been white once, perhaps, in an age when the legions still spoke of loyalty without choking on the word. Now it was green, brown, black, and yellow, layered with corrosion, split by saws, and hung with sensors that smoked with flies. Tubes entered his neck, his ribs, his stomach. One of his horns had grown through the remains of his helm and then rotted hollow. Something inside it buzzed. Around him waited his brothers, patient as grave soil. Rusted bolters in diseased hands, plague knives wet with toxins, blight grenades clinking against swollen thighs, armor plates, leaking pus, oil, and condensation from internal fevers that had burned for 10,000 years without consuming them. They did not hurry. They had forgotten the need. Rot always arrived. Morbus VII opened a vox channel to the graven anvil. "Warsmith Dral," he said, his voice a wet avalanche through the static. "You have found a seed from Grandfather's garden and mistake it for iron." Dral's reply came cold and immediate. "You are trespassing in my siege." "Your siege?" Morbus chuckled. The sound became coughing. The coughing became laughter. The laughter became the buzzing of flies. "All walls fall, all iron rusts, all flesh softens. The thing you keep was born of blessed corruption. It belongs beneath the fly wings, not under your dry arithmetic. It belongs to the hand that can use it. Then your hand will rot away." Dral cut the channel. On the far side of the system, another fleet arrived under a storm of impossible geometries. The Thousand Suns came in silence. Their escort vessels slid from the warp with hulls of blue, gold, and burning sigils, every angle too perfect, every silhouette wrong in ways that made human eyes ache. A silver tower ship turned above Varadon's orbital plane, surrounded by smaller craft whose prows carried eyes of blue flame. Their shields shimmered with sorcerous light. Their engines did not burn. They remembered motion and imposed it upon the void. Vor Asher, sorcerer of the Thousand Suns, watched the unfolding war from a chamber whose walls were mirrors, parchment, and stars that had never existed. His helm was crested and horned, his armor lacquered in sapphire and gold, his staff topped by an eye that blinked in different centuries. Around him stood rubrici, silent as sealed tombs, bolters held across hollow chests, dust in armor, legionaries reduced to obedience by catastrophe and spellcraft. Asher's voice reached the graven anvil next. "Warsmith," he said, smooth as a blade dipped in oil. "The Plague Lord misnames the miracle. This is not disease. Disease decays according to appetite. This is change according to will, a living equation, mutation given ballistic purpose, flesh solving itself through firepower." Dral answered, "You want it. I wish to understand it. All thieves say this. All iron warriors think ownership is comprehension." Dral let the silence answer. Asher continued, untroubled. "Your creature has already passed beyond your doctrine. You reduce. It transforms. You count. It becomes. There is wisdom in surrendering what you cannot bind. I will bind it with chains, wards, and sufficient punishment." The sorcerer laughed softly. "Then you still believe punishment is stronger than revelation?" That channel died as well. Thus the servants of the dark gods entered the system not as allies, but as claimants. The grey-forged host held the broken hive moons. The Death Guard drifted inward on tides of rot, seeding plague mines and corpse spores into the void. The Thousand Suns cut across the outer blockade in arcs that made no tactical sense until Imperial ships began firing at ghosts and colliding with their own escorts. Chaos did not unite. Chaos circled itself. Every god wanted the galaxy's walls torn down. Every god wanted reason drowned. Every god wanted reality flayed open and made obedient to nightmare. Yet each hated the others for hungering at the same carcass. Mordrin stood in the lower galleries of Hive Lamentum while those fleets came for him. He had not been told they came for him. He knew, not as intelligence, as pressure, as barrels turning toward a target. The universe had begun to aim at him, and the weapon mass of his body understood aim better than thought. No clean armor seam remained upon him. His old Mark III plate had sealed into a single layered shell of ceramite, black flesh, demonic alloy, and scar tissue. The hazard stripes on his greaves had warped into jagged bands across swollen plating. His right arm was no longer an arm in any meaningful sense. It had become a multi-barreled weapon mass built around the autocannon's original bones, with smaller muzzles sleeping between ribbed cables, ammunition nodules, and blackened feeder tissue. His left wrist carried the memory of a bolt pistol. His palm could open into a crude stubber muzzle. A knife slid from his elbow when his body thought distance had closed enough to require edge rather than impact. His face was becoming hidden from himself. Iron growths had crawled over the right half of his helm and into the grille. One lens remained red. The other had been replaced by a targeting optic that moved when his eye did not. Blood wept from beneath it in slow threads and vanished into the armor's cheek vents. When he breathed, his vox clicked with the sounds of loading mechanisms. Kordak no longer stood near him unless ordered. No one did. The Skitarii Alpha found Mordrin beneath Foundry Stack Obedience, where Mechanicus kill teams had entered the ruined hive through maintenance arteries and corpse-clogged manufactorum ducts. They came for tissue, scrapings, live blood, weapon growth, anything that could be sealed into a reliquary, and returned to Archmagos Kyle Vorg. They came knowing most of them would die. The Mechanicus accepted losses when knowledge was on the scale. The Alpha led them through toxic fog in perfect silence, radium carbine slung, plasma gun held in both augmetic hands. His cloak was torn. His brass skull mask bore scorch marks from Iron Warrior bolter fire. He had no name that mattered to Mordrin. He had a weapon that mattered very much. The fight began with a flash of sun-blue plasma. The first shot struck Mordrin's chest and drove him back through a wall of ammunition lockers. The armor over his torso vaporized in a smoking crater. Black flesh beneath bubbled, bone metal ribs glowed. Warning runes flooded his visor, drowned and vanished beneath the older rhythm of hunger. The Alpha advanced, machine legs steady, plasma coils screaming toward another discharge. Behind him, Rangers spread into firing positions. Their Binharic cant remained pure for 3 breaths. Mordrin raised the autocannon. The Alpha fired again. Mordrin's body moved wrong. Not fast, not graceful. His left knee locked, his torso twisted, and the plasma shot struck the swollen weapon mass of his right side instead of the exposed core of his chest. The impact blew off a cluster of secondary barrels and a sheet of fused plate. The pain was vast. It did not weaken him, it illuminated. He fired. The Alpha's escorts died first, not because they were the greater threat, but because the weapon voices wanted the duel cleared of clutter. Rangers snapped backward as shells found knee pistons, neck seals, optics, ammunition feeds. One Skitarius fired as he fell, galvanic rounds sparking from Mordrin's armor. Another began emitting corrupted static through his Vox grill, the same hungry counting that had infected others before. The Alpha ignored it and came on. His third plasma shot overheated the weapon's casing. The coils flared white. He should have vented. He did not. Logic had chosen sacrifice. He lunged forward, driving the plasma gun toward Mordrin's ruptured chest as if to fire directly into the wound. Mordrin's left hand closed around the barrel. The plasma gun burned through his palm. The pain sang. The little gun screamed in envy. The autocannon demanded retaliation. The thing inside his chest, the part no longer heart and not yet reactor, opened. The plasma gun sank into him. It did not vanish beneath skin like the pistol. It did not rest as a memory in meat. It replaced. Mordrin's torso split wider. The weapon folded inward through the wound, casing buckling, coils bending, heat sinks sliding between ribs. Flesh crawled over it. Demonic alloy grew around it. The Alpha tried to pull free, but the gun had ceased being his. The Skitarius's hands remained clamped to the grip as the weapon disappeared. Mordrin lifted him by that connection and watched the Alpha's arms tear from their sockets in a spray of lubricant and dark blood. The plasma core seated itself beneath Mordrin's sternum. Heat vents opened along his ribs. His next breath came out as ionized smoke. The Alpha fell backward without arms. Mordrin's new torso gun fired from inside him. A lance of unstable blue-white heat burst through the chest venting and reduced the Alpha to slag from pelvis to skull. The floor beneath him melted into glass. Mordrin looked down at the steaming hole in himself as new armor grew around it. "Fire," he said. No one knew whether he spoke to the weapon or as the weapon. Above the system, the Void War began in earnest. Imperial Navy ships moved to tighten the blockade. Cruisers and frigates formed kill lanes between the contaminated moons and the outer translation points. Void mines woke in ordered patterns. Lance batteries charged. Commanders swore loyalty to the throne and gave orders to destroy anything that broke cordon, loyal, traitor, refugee, or mechanicus. The Graven Anvil launched boarding torpedoes into the nearest Navy cruiser, while plague hulks spilled clouds of diseased assault boats toward the same prey. Thousand Suns escorts struck not where the line was weakest, but where fate was thinnest. Imperial ships fired into sorcerous duplicates. Plague missiles bloomed against loyalist shields and left rust spreading across them like living moss. Iron Warrior's torpedoes punched through a frigate's flank and disgorged breaches into its gun decks. Then, Death Guard boarding pods struck the same vessel, and the traitors fought one another in the corridors while Navy armsmen died between them. Every faction wanted the same prize. Every faction denied that it wanted anything so simple. On Varadan Prime, Inquisitor Malchus Venn read the latest sample reports in Holst's command bunker and ordered them destroyed. Archmagos Vorg's reliquaries, Skitari blood samples, infected shell casings, a severed hand fused around a las pistol, 3 guardsmen exposed during containment, 2 Mechanicus adepts who had touched contaminated oil, a stormtrooper who had handled one of the reliquaries before the seal warning changed from green to red. "All of it," Venn said. Colonel Holst stared at him. He had not slept in days. His eyes were sunk deep. His uniform was streaked with dust, blood and ash from command bunkers that no longer existed. The stormtrooper is loyal. He is exposed. He has shown no symptoms. Neither did the first carrier. Holst's jaw tightened. "We are executing our own evidence. We are denying the enemy propagation." Those men held the line. Venn turned from the report slate. His silver augmetic eyes reflected Holst without pity. "Mercy is how plague learns to walk." Holst said nothing after that. The executions were carried out by Flamer and Melter at range. In the ruins of Hive Lamentum, Chaos performed its own inquiry. Morbus 7 received hundreds of mortal prisoners from the lower Hab traps, men dragged in chains, workers, PDF remnants, infected cultists, and captives who had survived only because no one had yet assigned them a death. The Death Guard champion had them herded into a collapsed manufactorum nave where fungus already grew from the walls. His plague marines moved among them with rusted bolters lowered and plague knives ready. Soft flesh accepts gifts, Morbus said. Hard flesh must be taught. Blight grenades rolled among the prisoners. The first explosions were wet, bursting not with fire, but with clouds of green-black spores. Men inhaled, men vomited, men swelled, skin split, eyes ran, teeth loosened and fell out in bloody strings. Morbus watched with grandfatherly patience as plague softened them for what he believed was the proper inheritance of the virus. Some died immediately. Some lived long enough for infected ammunition to be pressed into their wounds. Vor Asher answered with his own demonstration. The Thousand-Sun Sorcerer took survivors from the edge of the plague pit, those who still breathed and screamed and understood enough to fear understanding. He raised his staff and spoke words that turned the air angular, flesh twisted, bones lengthened into casings, mouths stretched into muzzle shapes, spines folded into crude magazines. Several men became screaming ammunition, their bodies compressed into shells of meat, bone, and warp light, each one begging as Rubricae loaded them into captured launch tubes. Dral watched both procedures from a cracked gallery with Malagrax Nethor beside him. He did not condemn, he did not approve, he recorded. Morbus produced endurance, but poor structural weapon formation. Asher produced transformation, but unstable detonation patterns. Dral's own exposure trials produced fewer survivors, but more reliable integration in transhuman subjects. The Warsmith noted comparative value, failure rate, required materials, and battlefield utility, while prisoners screamed below him. Nethor's mechadendrites danced through the data. The plague method may increase tissue compliance. The sorcerer's method increases volatility, Dral said. Volatility has uses. So does ammunition, that waits until ordered to fire. Below them, Mordrin entered the nave. The prisoners quieted before the plague marines made them quiet. Even Morbus 7 turned. Even Vor Asher paused with one hand raised over a shell that had once been a man. Mordrin walked poorly now, but every step carried threat. His left knee bent with a reversed hitch, locking and unlocking like siege machinery. His torso vents breathed pale plasma smoke. His weapon arm dragged slightly until a target came near, then it rose with impossible eagerness. His helm was half buried in iron. His right eye optic wept blood continuously. New cables hung from his back like exposed nerves or ammunition feeds searching for a gun large enough to need them. Morbus 7 spread his arms. Flies poured from gaps in his armor. Come, blessed thing. Grandfather knows the shape of your hunger. You are rot with barrels. You are mine by first truth. Vor Asher's staff tapped the ground once. Reality rippled around it. He is not rot. He is becoming. Becoming has no grandfather. Dral descended the gallery stairs, his servo harness unfolding. He is property of the grave-forged host. Mordrin's head twitched toward each of them. Plague champion, sorcerer, warsmith, grandfather, change, iron, claims. Claims were targeting solutions spoken aloud. Morbus took one step closer. I will teach your flesh patience. Asher's eye staff blinked. I will teach your mutation language. Dral's voice became iron finality. You will obey. Mordrin's throat opened. Not his mouth. Not fully. A Vox speaker had grown through the fused grill beneath his chin, a black circular aperture wet with blood and oil. Static poured from it. Beneath the static came the click of chambers rotating, the whine of plasma charging, the soft seating of magazines under skin. I am not yours, Mordrin said. The three claimants held still. The weapon voices inside him counted distances, calibers, penetration angles, heat tolerances, detonation timings, the wet burst strength of swollen plague armor, the hollow dust resonance of Rubricae plate, the probable weakness in Dral's helm seal. Mordrin breathed ionized smoke across the dead. You are all only calibers. From the surface of Varadon Secundus, the heavens looked like they were falling. Men in the trenches of the quarantine line looked up through ash storms and saw stars descend in fire. They were not stars. Stars had never cared enough to come down and kill them. Each burning point was a lance strike punching through cloud cover, or a Navy cruiser dying in orbit, or a city-killing shell entering atmosphere with the slow patience of judgment. Some burned white, some bled red. Some came down in broken pieces, trailing debris, fuel, bodies, and the screaming wreckage of void craft that had failed to hold the blockade. The sky flashed again. A ship died above the northern hemisphere. Its spine broke under torpedoes from the Graven Anvil and rot missiles from the Maw of Kindly Ruin, while witchfire from the Thousand Suns escorts cut strange blue wounds through its void shields. The vessel came apart in silence too vast for sound, but fragments struck the upper atmosphere and became a storm of burning iron. 1,000 kilometers below, guardsmen watched the debris fall like meteors and prayed they were not under the impact line. Their prayers were answered. The debris fell on another regiment. By then, Varadon had ceased being a forge system and had become a sentence of death spoken in 100 dialects of war. The Imperium committed fully because the alternative was admitting that it had already lost. Astra Militarum troop fleets choked the outer approaches. Navy battle groups formed layered kill spheres around the contaminated moons. Mechanicus cohorts marched from sealed forge temples under banners of red and black, their noospheric hymns interrupted by quarantine warnings and machine fear. Night households made planetfall in dropkeeps, their towering war suits striding through ash plains with thermal cannons and battle cannons raised. Titan maniples crossed the horizon like walking cathedrals, their reactor hearts turning night into false dawn. Macro-artillery trains rolled on continental rail lines, each gun the length of a hab block, each shell blessed by priests who knew the shell would kill loyal men as readily as traitors. Billions were under arms. Billions. More were behind doors sealed from the outside. The Imperium called it containment. Inquisitor Malchus Venn called it the minimum acceptable cruelty. Bastion Kiln 88 stood on the eastern approach to Hive Lamentum, or what remained of it. It had been built by men who understood siegecraft in the loyalist fashion. Layered walls, interlocking fire lanes, void-shielded command vaults, ferrocrete redoubts, flak towers, tank traps, minefields, gun servitor alcoves, kill trenches, murder holes, flame ducts. The architecture of refusal. The bastion was held by the steel cohorts of Varadon and warriors of an Imperial Fist's successor chapter, the Stone Gauntlets, sons of Dawn in ochre and black plate. They had come late, drawn by astropathic distress and inquisitorial command, and had taken the wall with the grim obedience of men born from a Primarch who had taught his bloodline that a fortress was a promise made in stone. Across the broken ashfield came the Iron Warriors, wall breakers against wall keepers, hatred against discipline. Mordrin walked at the center of the assault. He was not hidden among the advancing line. He could no longer be hidden. Even among traitor Astartes, even among demon engines and warped armor, he had become an offense against silhouette. His body had thickened to bear the weight of itself. His spine had grown into an armored recoil column beneath his sealed plate. His legs were no longer equal. The left locked and stamped forward with each step, pistons of blackened bone metal shifting beneath stretched ceramite. The right had swollen around stabilizing growths that punched claws into the ground when he fired. His torso carried the absorbed plasma weapon like a furnace organ, vents along his ribs breathing blue smoke. His right arm was a cluster of barrels, receiver meat, cable, armor, and fused ammunition pathways. His left hand could still open and close, but the palm had a muzzle sleeping inside it, and the wrist twitched whenever a pistol voice woke. He moved slowly. Nothing stopped him. The bastion opened fire. The first line of mines erupted beneath slave infantry and cultist mobs driven ahead of the Iron Warriors. Men became fragments, red vapor, and tumbling limbs. Those who survived were ordered forward by shocklash and bolter fire. They reached the razor wire and died there, convulsing, screaming, cutting themselves apart as they tried to crawl through. Their bodies made bridges, their blood marked safe ground. Behind them, Iron Warriors' breaches advanced under shield cover. Havocs took position in shell craters. Predators rolled through the smoke. Vindicator siege tanks crawled toward the outer wall. Demolisher cannons loaded. A forge fiend opened its ectoplasma maws and hurled boiling warp fire into the bastion's forward gun nests. The stone gauntlets answered from the wall. Heavy bolters hammered. Lascannons burned. Missile launchers sent crack warheads into the advancing armor. A squad of loyalist terminators stood at the main gate beneath the chapter banner. Storm shields locked. thunder hammers raised, their sergeant voxing calm fire commands, while artillery shook the world around him. "For Dawn! For the throne! Hold the gate!" The Iron Warrior's vox returned in overlapping growls. Dawn built walls because he feared what came for them. "Hold still, sons of the Yellow Corpse. We brought mathematics." Mordrin heard them all. They meant less than the weapon voices. The autocannon spoke in bursts. Short hunger, long hunger, controlled hunger. It wanted repetition and recoil. The plasma beneath his ribs spoke in heat and appetite. It wanted armor to soften. It wanted men to become outlines of ash. Melter whispered closer than the others, though he had not yet grown one in full. It spoke intimately. It wanted to be pressed against plate, against bone, against the point where resistance became liquid. Lascannon spoke in straight lines. It had not formed in him yet, but the concept had begun to carve channels through his mind. It wanted distance to become meaningless. Mordrin himself had fewer words each hour. The Bastion's forward trenches disappeared beneath orbital bombardment and counterfire. Steel cohort regiments moved into prepared kill zones not because Holst believed they could halt Mordrin, but because Ven required data. Infantry advanced by company, then battalion, then regiment, men with lasguns, grenade launchers, plasma guns, missile teams, medici-packs, voxcasters, standards, prayers, fear. They were ordered to hold marked grids for specified intervals, while picked skulls and auger drones watched from the ruins. The 1st Regiment held for 4 minutes. Mordrin walked through them. Las fire scorched his armor. Frag grenades burst against his legs. Crack missiles struck his chest and tore craters in the demonic alloy. The wounds sealed as he advanced, not smoothly, not cleanly, but hungrily. New plates pushed out through torn ceramite, slick at first, then hard, veined like diseased ivory under black iron. A plasma gunner struck him squarely in the torso. The shot opened a smoking hole deep enough to reveal the blue glow of the absorbed weapon beneath his ribs. The wound closed around the glow. Mordrin replied with his wrist pistol, and the gunner's head burst inside his helmet. The 2nd Regiment was ordered to concentrate plasma saturation. They died measuring his response. Plasma bursts struck him from 3 angles, vaporizing outer armor, burning cables, exposing meat that was no longer entirely meat. Mordrin stopped for the first time. His stabilizer claws drove into the ground. His body widened, bracing. The plasma voice in his torso answered with joy. He fired back not with a beam, not yet, but with a venting eruption of blue-white heat that cooked a squad inside their flak armor and turned the men behind them into screaming silhouettes. In Ven's bunker, the Inquisitor watched the picked feed and dictated. Subject absorbs high-energy trauma. Regeneration accelerates after plasma exposure. Response pattern adaptive. Continue. Colonel Holst stood beside him, face like stone. That was the 9th Barraspine. I read the banners. They held the 2nd refinery line against orcs for 6 years. They held this one for 7 minutes and taught us something. Holst's augmetic fist tightened. You spend men like ammunition. Ven did not look away from the feed. That is how the Imperium survives. The 3rd Regiment never reached Mordrin. The Iron Warrior's artillery killed them first, and Dral recorded the loss of potential data with mild irritation. At the main gate, the stone gauntlets counter-attacked. Their terminators advanced into the breach made by a Vindicator shell. Storm shields raised, thunder hammers crackling, assault cannon roaring from the flank. Behind them came tactical squads in disciplined formation, bolters firing mass reactive death into cultists and Iron Warriors alike. Their chaplain strode among them, Crozius raised, skullhelm turned toward Mordrin. Abomination, by the light of him on terror, you will be cast down. Mordrin's head twitched. Light, terror, cast down, words with no caliber. The 1st Terminator hit him with a thunder hammer. The blow struck Mordrin's left shoulder and drove him sideways through a half-collapsed bunker wall. Ferrocrete burst around him. His armor cracked. His knee folded backward. His weapon arm hit the ground hard enough to bury barrels in dust and bone fragments. The stone gauntlets advanced. Mordrin rose heavier than before. The damaged knee snapped back into position with a grinding crack. His shoulder bulged, extruding a plate of black alloy around the impact crater. Something unfolded from his back, not a full weapon yet. More like the idea of one, a ribbed mount seeking mass and purpose. The autocannon came up. A crack missile struck him in the chest. The explosion swallowed him. When the smoke cleared, he was still moving. His torso had cratered inward. The crater was sealing. The plasma vents along his ribs glowed brighter. The Terminator Sergeant reached him first, storm shield slamming into Mordrin's weapon mass. The impact forced the autocannon aside. His thunderhammer rose for a killing blow. Mordrin's left fist closed around the sergeant's helm. The stone gauntlet was a veteran in tactical dreadnought armor, a warrior encased in relic plate, gene-wrought, oath-bound, hardened by centuries of war. Mordrin squeezed, the helm resisted, then it failed. Ceramite cracked, lenses burst, the skull inside collapsed under pressure, bone and brain matter forced through the broken grille in a wet spray. The thunderhammer fell from dead fingers. Mordrin pulled the corpse close as the next Terminator fired into him. Melter woke, not as a carried weapon, not as a clean gun. A circular aperture opened in Mordrin's torso beneath the plasma vents, black at the rim, white within. He pressed the dead sergeant between himself and the second Terminator and fired through the corpse. The melter blast turned the dead warrior's chest into vapor and punched into the living Terminator beyond. Armor softened. Flesh flashed to steam. The loyalist staggered, torso liquefied inside the plate, and collapsed with molten organs pouring from the waste seal. Mordrin kept hold of the first corpse. He used it as cover. Bolter shells detonated against dead Terminator plate while heavier weapons grew from Mordrin's back. The growths pushed through armor with sounds like bones breaking inside iron coffins. A launcher tube formed above his left shoulder, not yet stable, slick with black fluid. A cluster of smaller barrels opened near his spine and coughed smoke. His body learned the weight of them and thickened again. The stone gauntlets did not break. They came on because that was what Sons of Dawn did when walls failed. Their chaplain struck Mordrin with his Crozius, cracking the iron growth across his helm. For one heartbeat, Mordrin saw him clearly through the blood weeping from his targeting lens. Skull helm, black Crozius, oath parchments, hatred purified by faith. Mordrin's palm muzzle opened against the chaplain's abdomen. The first burst tore through armor seals. The second pulped organs. The third shattered the spine. The chaplain fell without crying out, his vox still broadcasting a half-finished hymn that ended in static. Bastion Kiln 88 began to collapse. Its outer wall fell under demolisher fire. Its inner redoubts burned. Macro artillery from both sides walked across the fortress, shell by shell, erasing trenches and command posts with impartial fury. Night suits dueled demon engines at the far gate, chainblades screaming against claws, thermal cannons turning armor into rivers. Steel cohort tanks pushed into the breach in desperate counterattack, Lehman Russ hulls grinding over the dead. Iron Warriors Lascannons cut them apart. Imperial artillery fired danger close, then fired closer. Drál watched from a forward command bunker taken from the bastion's western edge. Mordrin's picked feed played across a cracked display. The Warsmith watched him crush a Terminator, absorb melter function, survive plasma and crack impact, and choose targets no one had ordered him to kill. Malagrax Nethor stood beside him, mechadendrites coiling. He exceeds projected durability. He exceeds obedience, Drál said. Obedience may be reintroduced through pain engines. No, pain refines him. Through scrap code. He is not a machine. Through demon binding. He is not merely demon. Nethor's lenses clicked. Then through all three, Drál turned his helm toward the Magos. Prepare binding engines, containment chains, wards, anchor pylons. I want him capable of firing, but incapable of decision. A living emplacement. A weapon. And if the weapon refuses emplacement? Drál looked back to the feed as Mordrin tore a Lehman Russ commander from his cupola and crushed him into the turret ring. Then he is not a weapon, Drál said. He is a rival. The fortress died by degrees. Mordrin stood in its heart when the Warlord Titan came into view. It strode through the ash beyond the bastion, taller than cathedrals, its void shields shimmering around it in pale layers, its carapace weapons tracking targets across the battlefield. Its war horn sounded, and men fell to their knees from terror, awe, or concussion. Its name bled across Imperial Vox channels in Binharic and High Gothic. A god engine of the Collegia Titanica, walking judgment, reactor heart blazing beneath armor sanctified by 10,000 rites. Mordrin looked up. Lascannon spoke inside him in straight lines. Plasma hungered. Melter whispered, closer, closer. Autocannon laughed in bursts. The Titan's princeps marked the fortress. Perhaps he saw Mordrin. Perhaps he saw only contamination. Perhaps at that scale there was no difference between monster, bastion, regiment, and ruin. The warlord fired, the world became white. Bastion Kiln 88 vanished around Mordrin. Walls, bunkers, dead terminators, living guardsmen, iron warriors, cultists, tanks, guns, prayers, banners, bones, all of it became light and pressure and a rising column of pulverized fortress stone. The blast threw molten rockcrete into the sky. The shockwave flattened trenches for kilometers. Men outside the impact zone burst from the pressure. Armor cooked. Weapons became slag. Vox channels died in a single scream. When the firestorm faded, there was only a crater. Molten stone bubbled at its center. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then something beneath the glowing rock clicked. Once, twice. A feed mechanism turned under the crater glass. Something began reloading. The crater breathed. It was not breath as men understood it. No lungs moved beneath the molten stone. No chest rose. No mouth pulled ash through broken teeth. Yet the wound in the earth exhaled heat and weapon stink, a low furnace sigh that came up through glassed rockcrete and pulverized bone. Around the rim of the impact, the last surviving stones of Bastion Kiln 88 glowed dull red. The fortress had been erased so completely that its map no longer mattered. Its walls were vapor. Its trenches were flattened into black scars. Its defenders and attackers alike had been reduced to ash, slag, and scraps of armor twisted into shapes no artificer would name. Beneath the crater glass, something clicked again. The sound traveled through the ground, a shell seating into a chamber, then another, then a third. Mordrin rose through the molten stone like a weapon being cast. He did not climb. His body forced itself upward. Heat ran from him in sheets. Melted rock slid from the plates that had grown over his old armor. The Warlord Titan's blast had not killed him. It had burned away more of what still pretended to be legionary. Where his Mark III plate had once been scarred ceramite, now there was layered demonic alloy grown from meat and machine together. His torso had widened. His back had split and reformed around a column of ribbed black metal that ran from pelvis to neck. A recoil spine thick enough to bear artillery. Secondary limbs unfolded beneath his shoulders, not arms, not yet, but stabilizer spars tipped with hooked anchors. They struck the ground and hissed as they sank into cooling glass. His chest pulsed. Not with hearts alone. Something new beat there. A secondary reactor organ, blue behind black plating, thudding in counter-rhythm to his gene-wrought hearts. It did not pump blood. It fed power. It drank heat. It took the memory of the Titan's beam and kept a portion of it caged inside his ribs. Around it clustered ammunition glands, swollen nodules of brass-veined flesh that flexed beneath transparent armor growths. They squeezed. They formed. They fed shells into pathways that had replaced veins. Eyes opened across his shoulders. Small targeting optics, red and green and amber, each one wet at the rim, each one swiveling independently. They blinked through blood film and ash, searching for trajectories. His original helm was almost gone now, half buried under iron growth and bone plate. One side of the face remained as a distorted skull grill. The other had become a sensor mass weeping dark fluid down the remains of a cheek. He took one step. The ground broke beneath him. His stabilizer limbs punched down before he fired, though no enemy yet stood close enough to justify the motion. The body had learned recoil before intent. It had learned that mass required anchors. It had learned that survival was a matter of becoming a better firing platform. Mordrin tried to think. The attempt was smaller than it had been. Autocannons spoke in bursts. Plasma spoke in hunger. Melter spoke in closeness. Lascannon spoke in straight lines. The new reactor heart spoke in pressure. The ammunition glands spoke in birth. The recoil spines spoke in patience. The name Mordrin spoke in almost nothing at all. On the graven anvil, Malagrax Nethor received fragments of him with reverence fit for saints, though no saint in the Imperium would have known what to do with such worship. The tissue had been scraped from the crater by servo skulls that melted as they worked, clots of black flesh, slivers of living plate, a section of cable that twitched without signal, a cracked ammunition gland that continued extruding malformed rounds long after separation from its host. Nethor placed them in vats beneath lamps made from captive machine spirits. The organs grew. They did not heal. Healing implied a return to earlier form. These fragments advanced. They found purpose in the fluid and built toward it. One became a heart of iron muscle, beating against the glass with a piston rhythm. One extruded cables that searched blindly for ammunition feeds. One grew a small mouth of barrels and chanted in engine coughs. One generated tiny casings from pulped nutrient slurry, each shell too small to fire and too eager to exist. The Dark Mechanicum adepts gathered around them and sang Binharic hymns backwards through metal throats. Sacraments of useful blasphemy, Nethor said. The phrase was recorded by 3 servo-scribes and carved into the vat chamber door. A vat servitor broke its restraint harness and tried to press its open chest against the glass. It died before reaching the organ, but the cables inside the vat stretched toward it, eager to connect. Nethor watched the failed communion and made a note. Desire precedes compatibility, he said. Desire may be engineered. His greatest experiment waited below, inside a stolen Mechanicus xenovault dragged from the lower levels of Hive Lamentum before Imperial fire could burn it. The vault had been sealed under Red Protocol and guarded by Skitari until the Iron Warriors cracked the doors. Within lay a captured Tyrannid void organism, a severed piece of some greater bioship, held in stasis by null fields, nutrient tubes, and cruel Mechanicus curiosity. It was not a whole creature, yet it was not dead. Chitin plates rose and fell, tendrils drifted in preserving fluid, synaptic tissue pulsed inside translucent membranes, still dreaming of a hive mind too distant to answer clearly. The Mechanicus had wanted to study how a living fleet crossed the void. Nethor wanted to know whether the virus could teach hunger to aim. He had read forbidden accounts in corrupted archives, claims, warnings, half-burned data fragments from wars no sane magos would name. The Obliterator contagion had been described in one blasphemous record as capable of severing a Tyrannid biovessel from the synaptic will of the hive mind. The possibility had been dismissed by loyal savants as contradiction. Tyrannid biology was weapon already, they argued. It did not require machine. It did not accept possession in any conventional sense. Nethor despised words such as conventional. He opened a vial of Mordrin's blood and fed it into the organism through a spinal puncture. For 7 breaths nothing happened. Then the void organism screamed in machine code, not through a mouth, through every Vox unit in the vault, through the lighting grid, through the restraint clamps, through the teeth of the nearest thrall. Binharic shrieks erupted from meat that had never known Mars, never known language, never known the sacred hatred of machine and flesh. Its synaptic tissue convulsed, chitin plates split, cables pushed through them, black and wet, seeking sockets that did not exist. Bone cannons grew from the creature's flanks, shaped like Tyrannid bioweapons at first, then becoming barrels, then becoming something between both. Ammunition sacks formed beneath chitin, swelling with brass and acid. The null fields flickered as the organism's nervous system tried to broadcast and received only the counting hunger of the virus in answer. One of Nethor's adepts whispered a prayer to the Omnissiah before remembering he had betrayed him centuries ago. The infected organism tore loose from one restraint. A cannon mass unfolded from its side and fired a shell made of chitin, metal, and screaming tissue through the adept's chest. The shell detonated behind him and painted the wall with red robes, bone hooks, and augmetic fragments. Nethor did not retreat. He raised all his mechadendrites in praise. "Confirmation," he said, while the vault alarms howled. "Not Legion-specific, not human-specific, not machine-specific, purpose-specific." The creature's synaptic node burst outward in a bloom of black cables. For one brief and terrible moment, every gun in the vault turned toward it, even those lying unloaded on racks, even those in the hands of frightened thralls, even those sealed behind stasis fields. Weapon recognized weapon. Hunger recognized congregation. Nethor ordered the vault sealed after the organism killed 23 attendants and 1 Iron Warrior sentry. He did not destroy it. He called the losses acceptable. The report reached Inquisitor Ven aboard the command vessel Judgment without Dawn after being stolen from a dying Mechanicus data tether and decrypted by men who were executed immediately after reading it. Ven read once, then he upgraded the war. "Quarantine is over," he said. Colonel Holst stood before him in the strategium, hollow-eyed and ash-stained, the old soldier's face drawn by too many maps of men he had sent to die. Archmagos Kael Vorg attended through a hard light projection, his image flickering in red robes and a halo of rotating data glyphs. Around them, officers, astropaths, naval liaisons, stormtroopers, and servitors waited beneath the cold eye of the Inquisition. No ship leaves the system, Ven said. No survivor may be trusted, no relic preserved, no sample retained, no contaminated forge, shrine, archive, bunker, vessel, weapon, or corpse is to survive deliberate destruction. Varadon Secundus is now under extermination protocol. Vorg's projection flared with angry Binharik. Denied. Martian authority contests destruction of irreplaceable data. This phenomenon may represent the most significant techno-organic mutation since the earliest studies of demon engines. Knowledge cannot be burned because soldiers fear it. Ven looked at the projection. Knowledge can be burned very easily. I have done it before. You speak as butcher, not savant. I speak as the man authorized to ensure your curiosity does not become a black crusade. Holst's jaw tightened. My regiment still holds civilian sectors. Evacuation remains possible in some districts. Evacuation spreads uncertainty. There are loyal men down there. There are contaminated men down there. Not all. Ven's silver eyes turned toward him. You cannot know that. Holst did not answer because the Inquisitor was right, and because being right had never made a thing less monstrous. Across the system, orders went out. Refugee lanes were mined, salvage craft were destroyed, data arcs were fired upon before they finished identifying themselves. Mechanicus protests became static under lance fire. Ships that had fought for the Imperium hours before were now targets if their seals failed inspection or their captains hesitated to obey. The Imperium did not save itself by being kind. It endured by choosing who would die first. The Iron Warriors moved before extermination tightened around them. Their target was the crown of Varadon. The forge ring encircled the furnace world like a belt of iron continents linked by orbital bridges, void shield towers, manufacturing plates, docking spines, refinery chains, and cathedral foundries. It was large enough to cast shadows over hemispheres. Billions of shells were born there every year. Macro rounds for void batteries, battle cannon shells, bolter ammunition, lascannon capacitors, plasma coils, missile bodies, grenade casings, ship killer torpedoes, industrial death in every caliber the Imperium required. Drael understood the truth before any of his rivals did. If Mordrin reached the crown, the virus would not merely infect warriors, it would find a womb. The assault began with false retreats, mine detonations, boarding feints, and a storm of corrupted noospheric signals. Iron Warriors' craft struck the ring's western manufactorum arc, while plague hulks lumbered toward the southern docks and Thousand Suns escorts opened impossible corridors through the blockade. The Graven Anvil launched boarding torpedoes in disciplined waves. Dreadclaws followed. Macro cannon fire battered the ring's void shields. Demon engines were chained into cargo shells and fired directly into docking cathedrals. Mordrin stood in the forward assault hold before launch. Draal came to him there with Kordak, Savax and Malagrax Nethor at his back. Around them, Iron Warriors kept distance. Even the chained cultists driven into boarding harnesses would not look directly at the thing Mordrin had become. Draal studied him without flinching. "You were Iron Warrior," the Warsmith said. The old words moved through Mordrin slowly. Iron Warrior, Legion, Siege, Brother. The categories still existed, but far away, stored like obsolete ammunition in a forgotten vault. His throat speaker opened. The voice that emerged was deeper now, layered by chamber clicks and plasma hum. "I am Iron. You remained Warrior." No one spoke. For the first time, Kargan Draal understood that the transformation had not merely damaged Mordrin's loyalty, it had surpassed the concept. Legion. Identity had been a scaffold. The virus had climbed beyond it and left it standing below. Draal's servo harness twitched. "You will enter the crown under my command." Mordrin's shoulder eyes turned toward him one by one. Command is a trigger word. It is order. Order is aim imposed from outside. And you reject it. Mordrin's stabilizer limbs flexed. The deck beneath them dented. Targets will declare themselves. Draal did not reach for his weapon. Not yet. Nethor. The Magos inclined his masked head. After insertion, begin binding protocols. Mordrin heard. The weapons inside him heard. They did not respond. Not yet. At the edge of the system, space tore open again, and this time what emerged did not stink of rot or sorcery or iron spite. The Grey Knight's strike cruiser came through a storm of demonic interference with its wards burning like cold stars. Its hull was silver beneath battle scoring, marked with sigils of banishment and purity, seals that streamed psychic fire in the void. Demon forms clawed at its Geller wake and burst apart against wards older than many worlds. The ship did not arrive to reinforce the Imperial line. It arrived like a blade placed against a wound. Justicar Othran Vale stood in the teleportarium with his squad around him, all in silver Terminator plate, Nemesis weapons locked and sanctified storm bolters loaded. Their helms were expressionless. Their minds were not. They felt the system ahead as a bruise in reality, a place where weapon hunger, flesh corruption, and demon logic had tangled into something that could become doctrine if allowed to spread. An astropathic echo of Ven's last message still hung in the chamber. Not victory. Severance. Vale looked to his brothers. "We do not come to retake the forge," he said. "We do not come to preserve relics, rescue regiments, or punish traitors for the sake of punishment. We come to cut the vector before it becomes crusade." A brother raised his force halberd. "And the infected Astartes?" Vale's eyes remained on the teleport coordinates. "No Astartes remains. Only outbreak." The teleportarium filled with white fire. Mordrin's Dreadclaw struck the crown of Varadon through a storm of defense fire and shattering void shields. The impact killed every mortal strapped into the forward bays. Their bodies burst and ran down the walls in red strings. The assault petals opened into a manufactorum hall larger than a hive district, dormant under emergency lockdown. Its assembly lines halted, its conveyor rivers still, its shell presses raised like execution blocks awaiting necks. Mordrin stepped out. The deck trembled beneath his weight. Behind him came iron warriors, breachers, dark mechanicum adepts, chain-bound cultists, and binding engines dragged on grav sleds beneath veils of false piety. Ahead stretched the crown's ammunition heart. Thousands of dormant assembly arms hung from the ceiling. Macro shell molds lined the walls. Autoloader chains slept in long black loops. Forged shrines glowed low, their machine spirits terrified into silence by the assault. Mordrin breathed through reactor heat and weapon smoke. Ammunition glands pulsed beneath his armor. The secondary heart thudded. Shoulder eyes opened wider. Cables along his back lifted as if scenting the air. All around the hall, machinery began to turn. Not on command from the Mechanicus, not by order of Dral. The assembly lines rotated toward Mordrin. Loading claws shifted. Conveyor belts groaned. Shell presses descended a fraction in greeting. Weapon racks unlocked. Thousands of empty barrels tilted in his direction like worshippers bowing their heads. Mordrin entered the crown of Varadon. The manufactorum recognized him as congregation. The last part of Mordrin died without ceremony. There was no final confession, no remembered oath, no image of Olympia, no memory of the legion before bitterness, no brother's hand upon his pauldron, no curse spat at the false emperor, no bargain whispered to the gods. The thing that had once been Varkal Mordrin crossed the threshold inside the crown of Varadon and became too vast for its name. The manufactorum knew before the warriors did. The continent-sized forge ring shuddered around him. Dormant assembly lines groaned awake. Shell presses lowered like heads bowing in reverence. Crane arms rotated in their ceiling rails, dripping oil like black rain. Conveyor belts moved without command from any surviving tech priest. Weapon racks unlocked along cathedral walls. Macro shell magazines opened their iron throats. Plasma ducts brightened beneath grilled flooring, pulsing with contained suns. Every machine spirit in the Western Manufactorum arc either screamed, submitted, or began to count ammunition. Ferrum Primus walked forward. The name rose through the vox before anyone spoke it. It came from corrupted cogitators, from damaged servo skulls, from infected cultists weeping on the deck, from dark mechanicum adepts whose mouths filled with blood as they translated the signal. Ferrum Primus, first iron, first gun, first answer. Mordrin was a memory embedded in it, like a spent casing under battlefield mud. The crown became war. Iron warriors breached from the western assault ports, shields locked, combi bolters barking, chain blades chewing through navy armsmen and manufactorum militia. Plague marines forced their way through the southern docking spines, rusted bolters coughing mass reactive filth, plague knives opening sealed suits, blight grenades bursting among Skitari maniples and turning disciplined machine men into stumbling rot. Thousand Suns. Rubricae marched in silence through impossible fire lanes, their bolters firing with perfect rhythm while sorceress wards bent las fire aside. Dark Mechanicum engines crawled from assault landers, many-legged and furnace-mouthed, dragging binding pylons, data altars, and surgical cranes. Imperial Guard regiments poured into transit decks from emergency landers, bayonets fixed, officers screaming coordinates, commissars shooting anyone who slowed. Skitarii defended in red ranks beneath noospheric distress, galvanic rifles and plasma calivers raised in machine-perfect volleys. Grey Knights struck by teleport flare, silver plate appearing inside the most contaminated halls, sanctified storm bolters firing before the white light faded. Navy armsmen died in the millions of small spaces between them. The Crown had never been built for mercy. Its corridors were wide enough for ammunition crawlers, not retreating men. Its plasma ducts ran beneath walkways that melted when shells missed. Its cathedral assembly halls were vast enough to hold regiments and low enough to make artillery echoes tear eardrums. Its macro shell magazines rose in stacked vaults, each one a cathedral to impact, each shell sleeping in cradle chains thicker than a man's torso. Every level smelled of hot metal, machine incense, fear, oil, and fresh slaughter. Ferrum Primus entered the first assembly hall, and the enemy taught it language. Against tanks, it grew Melter. A squadron of Lehman Russ battle tanks had been landed inside the Manufactorum rail concourse, their commanders brave or desperate enough to form a firing line between shell loaders and transit shrines. Their battle cannons spoke together. The shells struck Ferrum Primus and burst across its body in hammering fire. One tore open the swollen left side of its torso, another shattered armor growth around the recoil spine. A third blew away several shoulder optics and exposed wet black tissue filled with brass veins. Ferrum Primus stopped. Its stabilizer limbs punched into the deck. Flesh opened along its chest. 3 melter apertures formed in a vertical row, white hot at the center, ringed by black metal that grew teeth as it cooled. The nearest Lehman Russ fired again. Ferrum Primus answered. The melter beams did not lance like light. They exhaled intimacy. They reached the tank and made its armor remember it had once been liquid. The turret sagged into the hull. The crew inside became steam, fat vapor, and shadows cooked onto the inner plating. The next tank tried to reverse. Ferrum Primus took one heavy step and grew another melter mouth from its left palm. The beam entered through the driver's slit and turned the entire vehicle into a screaming furnace. Against infantry, it grew rotary hunger. Steel cohort guardsmen advanced from both side gantries in massed ranks, laser guns flashing, grenade launchers barking, plasma gunners marked by their glow. They were not cowards. Cowards had died before reaching the Crown. These men came because orders remained orders even when the order was extinction. They fired until barrels smoked. They died without seeing the thing inside the smoke turn toward them. Ferrum Primus raised its weapon arm, and the swollen mass split along. Several seams, rotary cannons unfolded from beneath armored flesh, barrels slick as newborn bone and black as void iron. They spun once, twice, then became a solid scream. The guard line vanished in red strips. Men burst apart at the waist. Helmets flew with heads still inside them. Laser guns snapped in hands that no longer had bodies. A commissar tried to raise his sword and lost the arm, chest, and face in the same breath. Blood covered the gantry rails so thickly that the next rank slipped as it advanced and died on its knees. Against Psychers, it grew static. Vor Asher came with blue fire in one hand and destiny in the other. His rubricae formed around him in a crescent, bolters thundering into iron warriors and guardsmen alike. The sorcerer's staff burned with warp light. He spoke words that made bulkheads sweat and turned falling shell casings into serpents of gold dust. He looked upon Ferrum Primus with possession masked as revelation. "You are change without scripture," Asher said. "Kneel, and I will give your becoming a name the gods can read." Ferrum Primus turned its remaining original helm lens toward him. Warp static emitters opened across its shoulders like diseased flowers. They did not fire shells. They broadcast wrongness. The air between them became a storm of broken prayers. Weapon reports played backward, Binharic screams, and the dry click of empty magazines in the skulls of men. Asher's spell buckled. His rubricae staggered, dust souls rattling inside sealed armor. The sorcerer raised wards of blue flame, and the emitters answered with a signal made from the hunger of every infected weapon in the Crown. Asher screamed as the spell collapsed through his own staff. Ferrum Primus did not finish him. The battle swallowed him. The sorcerer vanished behind a fall of burning gantry and blue fire, alive or dead, or changed into some other problem. Ferrum Primus had already learned what it needed from him. Against Terminators, it grew siege guns. Draal's finest came in disciplined formation beneath the black and iron banners of the grave-forged host. Cataphracti plate, Reaper autocannons, chain fists, combi melters, siege shields, veterans of 10,000 betrayals, warriors who had cracked bastions under the guns of the Great Crusade and burned loyal worlds during the long retreat into damnation. They advanced not to rescue Mordrin, not to honor him, not to preserve a brother. They came with chains. Demon-forged siege pylons rolled behind them on heavy grav sleds, each one inscribed with wards cut into black iron and bound with screaming faces hammered flat into the metal. Dark Mechanicum crews chanted control cant, while blood engines pumped warp-charged coolant through containment coils. The pylons were meant to anchor Ferrum Primus, to nail it beneath the graven anvil as a living arsenal, a gun god in chains, a womb of ammunition and fire for wars yet unborn. Draal walked behind the Terminators, Thunderhammer in one hand, his servo harness spread wide. Containment pattern, he voxed. Do not destroy the asset. Cripple mobility. Anchor limbs. Bind weapon mass. Preserve firing organs. Kordak's voice answered after a hesitation. It was Mordrin. Draal did not turn. No, it was useful. That was chaos in its purest honesty. Brotherhood became ownership. Concern became calculation, loyalty became a leash, every gift was a hook, every alliance was a feeding posture. The Iron Warriors did not kneel to gods, yet they had learned the gods' lesson better than priests. Nothing was sacred unless it could be made to serve. The first binding pylon fired. Chains of black light wrapped around Ferrum Primus, biting into armor, flesh, barrels, and bone. Wards flared. Servo claws slammed into the deck. A second pylon anchored his stabilizer limbs. A third drove barbed hooks into the recoil spine. Ferrum Primus looked down at the chains. For one heartbeat, something of Mordrin might have understood the betrayal. Then, understanding became ammunition. Its body opened, not wounded, opened. Lascannons emerged along the spine, their focusing crystals grown from blood and glass. Plasma cannons bulged from the torso in pulsing sacks of blue heat. Missile pods unfolded from the shoulders, each tube lined with teeth like loading clamps. Heavy flamers pushed from beneath the weapon arm, nozzles drooling promethium that smelled of corpse fat. Assault cannons spun from the ribcage. Gravitic distorters formed as black rings of metal and meat along the back, humming with pressure that made armor plates tremble. Volkite-like beams coalesced in smooth red lenses beneath the neck, old Martian death reborn without permission from Mars. Other weapons formed too, things with no loyal classification, barrels that fired screaming light, vents that spat shards of frozen sound, organs that launched shells which changed caliber mid-flight. It did not carry them, it birthed them. Ferrum Primus fired at the binding pylons. The first pylon vanished into white heat. The second was torn apart by armor-piercing siege rounds that drilled through warded metal and detonated in the demon-bound core. The third tried to retreat on its grav sled and was caught by the gravitic distorter. It folded inward, crew, chains, faces, and iron collapsing into a fist-sized knot of screaming metal. Then the broken chains grew into Ferrum Primus. They sank into its back. The barbs reversed. The diamond-forged links became auxiliary limbs, lashing out with anchor hooks and weapon mounts. A pylon control coil fused to its shoulder and began feeding targeting data into the eyes there. The Dark Mechanicum crews died praising and begging in the same breath as the thing they tried to bind made their tools part of its body. Draal's Terminators attacked. They came with discipline worthy of the legion that had made them. Reaper autocannons hammered. Chain fists roared. Combi melters fired at close range. Siege shields locked. They struck as Iron Warriors should strike, by weight, angle, and pressure. Ferrum Primus reduced them to lessons. One Terminator's shield held against the first burst. The second burst learned the shield's vibration. The third fired shells that struck at precisely the frequency required to crack the field projector. The fourth opened the warrior behind it from knee to helm. Another Terminator reached close enough to bury a chain fist in Ferrum Primus's flank. Melter opened in response and fired through the attacker's torso from point-blank range, spraying molten ceramite and cooked organs across the deck. A Reaper gunner stood his ground and poured fire into Ferrum Primus's face until a siege cannon grew from the beast's abdomen and turned him into shredded plate and meat mist. Kordak reached the front last. For a moment, the old Havoc faced the thing that had been his brother. Missile launcher raised, armor cracked, voice low on the Vox. Varkul. Every weapon on Ferrum Primus paused by a fraction, then the name passed through the mind of the thing and found nothing to strike. Kordak fired. The missile hit Ferrum Primus in the chest and burst against new plate. Ferrum Primus answered with a palm cannon. Kordak disappeared in a storm of red fragments and black ceramite. Dral watched his finest die and finally understood that he had not lost control of a weapon. He had been standing too near a battlefield that had learned to walk. The Grey Knights entered the hall through sanctified teleport flame. Justicar Othran Vale appeared with his squad in silver Terminator plate, psychic wards burning across their armor, Nemesis Force weapons glowing with restrained wrath. They did not recoil. They did not marvel. They had seen demon princes crowned in entrails, worlds possessed by hunger, saints turned inside out by the warp, and horrors that made mortal sanity a disposable resource. Monstrosity did not surprise them. Recognition did. Vale saw the truth in the thing before him. Not possession alone, not mutation alone, not a demon wearing armor. This was doctrine. This was logistics corrupted into organism. This was a replicating answer to the ancient weakness of armies. Ammunition, weapon, wielder, and will made one. If it spread, war itself would become a contagion. Banishment formation, Vale ordered. No relic recovery, no mercy, sever the vector. Stormbolters fired sanctified rounds. Psychic wards flared as warp static hammered into them. Nemesis halberds cut through weapon limbs. One Grey Knight drove his blade into an ammunition gland and recited words that made the organs scream fire from every shell within it. Another was struck by a gravitic pulse and crushed into his own armor, bones and organs compressed until his plate collapsed inward. Vale reached Ferrum Primus with his force sword raised and carved a warding rune through the fused chest. Plate. Ferrum Primus staggered. For the first time since entering the crown, it recoiled from something other than force. The rune burned inside it. The weapons screamed. Plasma hunger became pain. Autocannon bursts became stuttering thought. Melter intimacy became rejection. The old name Mordrin flickered once in the dark. Then a weapon with no sane classification opened beneath the rune and fired sound made solid. The blast threw Vale backward through a conveyor altar. He rose at once, armor cracked, sword still burning. Again, he said. Across the system, Inquisitor Ven gave the order that ended all pretense of saving the crown. Overload the reactor core. On Varadon's surface, Colonel Holst heard it through a command link choked with static, screams, and orbital interference. He stood in the ruins of a bunker that had been moved 3 times because every previous bunker was now a crater. His surviving officers watched him. Outside, the sky burned with the shadow of the forge ring above them. "My lord," Holst said slowly, "the crown's descent path crosses the equatorial hive belt. I know. There are loyal billions beneath that ring. They are under contamination shadow. They are not all infected. They cannot be proved clean." Holst closed his eyes for the space of 1 breath. "If the crown breaks, debris will kill them." Ven's voice was iron over the channel. "Then they die loyal." The order passed. Reactor rights were overridden. Mechanicus locks were broken by inquisitorial kill codes. Loyal adepts who refused were shot by stormtroopers. Plasma containment failed in stages across the crown. Warning bells rang through halls already drowning in war. The forge ring began to shake as its own heart was forced to murder itself. Ferrum Primus felt the reactor pain. It raised its many heads, eyes, lenses, vents, and barrels. All across the system, Vox channels opened without permission. Imperial, Traitor, Mechanicus, Navy, Guard, Grey Knight, Plague Hulk, Sorcerer Ship, Slave Collar, Gun Servitor, Titan Manifold. Every channel filled with static, and then with a voice that was almost coherent. Ammunition is prayer. Impact is answer. In Hive Lamentum, infected cultists heard scripture and began killing one another for the honor of becoming spent. Among the Iron Warriors, survivors heard threat and understood that no chain would ever hold it. In the Imperial fleet, captains heard extinction speaking in battlefield cant. Inquisitor Ven heard confirmation. The crown of Varadon began to break apart. Cathedral assembly halls split along their vaulted spines. Plasma ducts erupted in rivers of blue fire. Macro shell magazines detonated in chained apocalypse, each explosion birthing another, each vault dying louder than the last. Conveyor bridges tore free and spun into the void. Manufactorum plates the size of cities cracked loose from the ring and began their long fall toward the world below. Ferrum Primus walked through the reactor fire. The Grey Knights pursued. Iron warriors fled or died. Plague marines laughed as they burned. Thousand Suns Rubricae marched into collapsing light because no living fear remained inside them. Skitari stood at their posts until their noospheric links dissolved. Guardsmen screamed prayers as the decks split under their boots. Dark Mechanicum adepts tried to gather samples and were swallowed by flame. Ferrum Primus grew brighter. The reactor fed it, the explosions taught it. The collapsing forge ring offered every weapon, every pressure system, every ammunition right, every sacred engine and forbidden overload as instruction. It grew heavier. Stabilizer limbs multiplied. Siege barrels unfolded from its back. Plasma organs swelled. Gravitic rings turned around its spine. Lascanon crystals burned with stolen starfire. It grew more impossible with every step. And inside it, very far away, the last spent casing of Varkal Mordran finally cooled. The Imperium stopped speaking of victory. The word remained in sermons, in commissarial threats, in the mouths of preachers screaming over open vox while the sky fell. But the commanders of the blockade no longer used it. Victory implied possession. Victory implied banners raised over recovered ground, relics secured, martyrs counted, enemy dead measured against loyal dead and declared acceptable. Varadon had passed beyond such accounting. There would be no recovered forge, no sanctified manufactorum, no loyal remnant drawn from the ashes and paraded before the sector as proof that mankind endured. There would only be denial. Nothing leaves. That was the last true order. The Imperial Navy formed its kill sphere beyond the outer gravity wells, a layered cage of cruisers, destroyers, frigates, minefields, monitor stations, defense platforms, and dead men with their hands locked around firing controls. Ships that had once fought shoulder to shoulder now trained weapons upon one another. Vox prayers went unanswered. Clearance codes expired between transmission and reply. Captains begged authentication. Astropaths screamed of contamination in dreams. Mechanicus data arcs tried to flee with encrypted vaults of sacred knowledge, chanting Binharic proofs of loyalty into the void. The kill sphere burned them before their prayers finished. One data arc broke from the Crown's eastern wreckage with its shields failing and its engines bleeding plasma. Its vox repeated a Martian invocation, promising samples, recordings, blessed schematics, knowledge that might save future wars. A Navy cruiser opened fire at command range. Lance beams crossed the arc from prow to stern. The vessel split, spilling red-robed bodies, reliquary vaults, servo skulls, and sealed sample coffins into the dark. Secondary fire vaporized the wreckage. Nothing was allowed to drift. A refugee convoy from the southern refinery moons tried to run without Vox traffic, its ships dark, its transponders dead, its holds packed with workers, wounded guardsmen, medici staff, children of labor clans, and weapons hidden beneath tarpaulins because no imperial citizen had ever believed survival should come unarmed. The convoy reached the second perimeter before a picket frigate found it by thermal bloom. The frigate captain requested confirmation. Inquisitor Malchus Venn gave none. The convoy died in silence. On the planet below, silence was impossible. The crown of Varadon came apart overhead, and gravity made war crude again. City-sized plates of manufactorum armor tore loose from the ring and fell burning through atmosphere. Macro shell magazines cooked off as they descended, scattering explosions across the sky like the anger of dead gods. Plasma ducts ruptured in orbit, raining blue fire across continents. Conveyor bridges as long as mountain chains broke into molten spears and drove themselves into hive cities, trench belts, refugee camps, tank parks, shrine districts, and command posts with the blind honesty of physics. Billions died beneath falling industry. Hive stacks became impact craters. Defense lines vanished under manufacturing fragments heavier than fortresses. Armored regiments waiting for orders were crushed beneath falling orbital machinery before their engines finished warming. Priests leading final prayers were reduced to ash by debris that had once carried ammunition to worlds they would never see. Men died loyal, traitor, infected, clean, brave, screaming, asleep, praying, cursing. The falling crown did not distinguish. It did not ask for identification. It simply arrived. Heroism disappeared beneath mass. A guardsman held a breach against cultists for an hour, only for a falling reactor plate to erase him, his enemies, the wall behind him, and the regiment meant to relieve him. A night pilot killed 3 demon engines in single combat before a macro shell cradle fell from orbit and drove his warsuit knee-deep into the crust, crushing the noble inside his throne before he could finish his oath. A Skitarii cohort maintained firing discipline as the air around them became fire, then ceased to exist when the forge bridge above them struck the ground. The war had grown too vast for witnesses. Inside the collapsing crown, Kargan Dral went to meet the thing he had intended to own. He did not plead. Iron warriors did not plead. Not before gods, not before loyalists, not before death, not before failed weapons that had become something larger than command. He crossed a cathedral assembly hall lit by reactor fire and falling shell sparks, his thunderhammer in one fist, combi melter locked to his gauntlet, siege shield braced on his other arm, his servo harness unfolded behind him, claw limbs clicking, plasma cutters whining, drill arms trembling for contact. Around him, the last of his personal guard lay in pieces, their cataphracti plate shredded into black scrap and red matter by weapons their own legion had taught the galaxy to fear. Ferrum Primus stood amid the ruin. It had grown again. The reactor fire painted it gold, black, and bone pale. Stabilizer limbs pierced the deck around it. Siege barrels rose from its back, like the organ pipes of a murdered cathedral. Its plasma organs pulsed beneath cracked armor. Gravitic rings turned slowly along its spine, bending smoke and sparks into spirals. Its shoulder eyes watched in every direction. Its old helm was almost entirely buried beneath iron growth, but one red lens still burned where a face had once been. Dral stopped at weapon range. "Listen," the warsmith said. Ferrum Primus turned several barrels toward him. Others remained aimed at distant enemies, collapsing gantries, reactor leaks, grey night teleport flares, plague forms, rubrique silhouettes, and ammunition hoppers beginning to explode. Dral did not lower his hammer. "You have exceeded your first use. That does not mean you have no use. I can give you wars without end. Worlds as magazines, hives as shell presses, fleets as delivery systems. I can chain entire sectors to your appetite." The thing's throat speaker opened with a wet metallic click. "Command," it said, as if tasting rust. "Command is purpose." "Command is small." Dral's eyes narrowed behind his helm lenses. "I offer conquest." Ferrum Primus shifted. Armor plates opened and closed across its chest as if breathing. Ammunition glands tightened. New shells slid through internal feed paths. "What caliber is a warsmith?" Dral answered with his combi melter. The shot struck Ferrum Primus in the torso and turned a section of weapon flesh to incandescent slag. Dral moved with the blast, faster than his bulk suggested. Siege shield raised against the answering fire. Auto cannon bursts hammered the shield and drove him back step by step. Runes flared across the shield face, overload warnings bleeding red. He angled the plate, let the bursts deflect, and launched himself through a storm of brass. His thunderhammer struck Ferrum Primus in the side. The impact cracked demon alloy and drove the creature into a shell press. The press collapsed behind it. Ferrum Primus answered with a melter blast from beneath its ribs. Dral caught it on the siege shield. The shield began to run like wax. His servo harness fired plasma cutters into the creature's stabilizer limbs, severing one at the knee joint. Black fluid and molten metal sprayed across the deck. Dral struck again. Hammer to chest, hammer to gun mass, hammer to the half-buried helm. Each blow would have broken a tank. Each blow forced adaptation. Ferrum Primus grew a weapon Dral recognized from old siege yards, a heavy breaching cannon once mounted on wall crushers during campaigns whose names had been eaten by time. Then it grew another. Then it birthed a chain of micro-missiles from the shoulder pylon that had once been Dral's own binding device. It fired every solution the warsmith had ever respected. Lascanon beams cut straight lines through his servo harness. A plasma cannon burst blew one mechanical limb from his back. Armor-piercing shells cracked his thigh plate. A heavy flamer washed him in burning fuel, cooking the trophies chained to his belt until they burst. He He kept advancing because he was Iron Warrior and because hatred had mass. He reached Ferrum Primus one last time and drove the Thunderhammer into the glowing reactor organ beneath its chest. The detonation threw both of them apart. Drál hit the deck hard enough to crack it. His hammer spun away. His siege shield was a ruined crescent. His chest plate had split. He tried to rise, one knee grinding, one arm hanging useless. Ferrum Primus stepped from the fire with a crater in its torso already closing. Drál looked up. He did not plead. Ferrum Primus fired a weapon made from the memory of Drál's own fortress guns. The warsmith vanished in a burst of black ceramite, cooked flesh, and iron fragments. His helm spun once across the deck, lenses still burning, then disappeared beneath falling shell casings. Elsewhere in the crown, Malagrax Nethor fled with salvation packed in murder glass. His escape craft clung to the underside of a collapsing manufactorum spur, engines cold, hull masked by scrap code and the screams of decoy servitors. Within its hold rested sealed samples of Mordrin's blood, organs grown in vats, slivers of demonic alloy, infected ammunition glands, and a pulsing mass of corrupted tyrannid tissue imprisoned inside a triple-warded containment cylinder, the void organism fragment pressed against the glass from within, chitin split by forming barrels, synaptic tissue flashing Bin-Harik nightmares. Nethor had no loyalty to Drál, no loyalty to Morbus, no loyalty to Asher. He had loyalty only to useful blasphemy. The escape craft detached as the crown broke. Grey Knights found it before it crossed the debris field. Silver boarding torpedoes struck the hull. Sanctified charges blew the lock. Justicar Othran Vale's brothers entered through white fire, stormbolters raised, nemesis blades burning. Nethor's thralls died in disciplined bursts. Demon-bound servitors were banished before their weapons reached full charge. The Magos retreated through his own laboratory, mechadendrites carrying sample cases, while he spilled scrap code into the air like poison. Vale cut through a combat engine and stepped over it. By the authority of Titan and the throne, this contagion ends. Nethor turned one brass lens toward him. Ending is superstition. Data migrates. A containment case vanished from Nethor's grasp, not through motion, through prepared treachery. One sample, smaller than a man's fist, encoded into a warp-locked data vault hidden outside real space, transmitted through a chain of sacrificial machine spirits that died screaming as they carried it. Vale felt the witching of it and hurled his force sword through Nethor's chest. The Magos looked down at the blade. "Acceptable loss," he said. Vale ripped the sword free and burned what remained. The escape craft was destroyed with every sample the Grey Knights could touch. Not all samples could be touched. Vale returned to the crown by teleport flare, knowing the war had already entered its final breath. He led the last assault directly onto Ferrum Primus. The Grey Knights appeared around the Obliterator in a ring of silver and psychic fire. They struck before the creature finished turning. Nemesis blades carved sanctified runes into weapon flesh. Halberds opened ammunition glands and burned the forming shells with names of banishment. Ward staves hammered against gravitic rings. Stormbolters fired sanctified rounds into eyes, vents, feed mouths, and reactor tissue. Their voices rose in a chant that hurt reality around them. Ferrum Primus adapted while they prayed. It grew guns that fired shards of nullified metal, dead fragments that punched through psychic wards without acknowledging them. A Grey Knight took one through the helm and died without a sound, his brain and soul severed in the same instant. Another was engulfed by screaming warp flak that detonated around his wards, not against them, filling the air with fragments of unborn demons and broken machine spirits. Vale drove his sword into Ferrum Primus again and carved a rune deep enough to expose the reactor heart. For one breath, the creature shook. The old name flickered somewhere inside the black, Varkul. Then the ammunition glands contracted. A burst of siege shells blew Vale and his surviving brothers across the hall. One did not rise. One rose with half his torso gone and kept chanting until a melter-mouth opened and turned him to vapor. Vale stood again, armor split, blood running between silver plates, sword still alive with psychic flame. "Again," he said, though no one remained close enough to hear, Inquisitor Ven authorized cyclonic torpedoes from the command deck of Judgment Without Dawn. The system was unstable. Every navigator warned it. Every astropath screamed it. The warp had been torn raw by Plague Hulk translation, Thousand Suns sorcery, demonic interference, infected machine code. dying reactor fields, and the gravitational agony of the Crown's collapse. Total destruction could not be guaranteed. In places like this, corruption could hide in conditions rather than bodies, burn the flesh, and the echo might remain, shatter the ship, and the hunger might persist in a shell casing. A prayer, a dream of recoil. Ven knew. He gave the order anyway. Cyclonic payloads armed, reported the naval officer. Target all primary contamination masses. Crown remnants, Gathalamor, Hive Lamentum, Graven Anvil if it crosses the firing arc, any vessel attempting escape. My lord, friendly formations remain in several target zones. Ven looked at the system display. There are no friendly formations in Varadon, only degrees of risk. On the surface, Colonel Sarn Holst died as he had commanded, in filth, static and duty. The last loyal ground battery under his authority stood in the ruins of an equatorial gun field, half buried beneath ash from the falling crown. Its macro cannons were cracked. Its loading servitors were dead. Its crewmen had torn open their hands hauling shells manually into breaches never meant to be fed by mortal muscle. Infected cult columns came through the smoke, thousands of them, men and not men, workers with guns nailed into their flesh, guardsmen with bayonets grown through their palms, ammunition worshippers howling praise to impact. Holst stood in the command pit with a las pistol, an augmetic hand, and no illusions. Battery command to all surviving guns, he voxed. Load airburst. Fuse short. Coordinates follow. His artillery captain stared at him, face grey under blood. Sir, those are our coordinates. Holst entered the data himself. Correct. We can withdraw to the secondary pit. There is no secondary pit. The cultists reached the outer barricade. The first wave died under las fire. The second climbed over them. The third carried the weapons of the first two. Holst watched the range close. Fire! The guns answered. Shells rose screaming into the poisoned sky, arced, and came down upon the battery that had birthed them. The world became concussion, flame, and the wet disassembly of bodies. Holst died with one hand on the firing slate and the other around his las pistol grip. Not noble, not clean, not witnessed by saints. His name entered a casualty ledger that would be lost when the command network burned. His death bought minutes. The Imperium had always been built from minutes purchased with lives. Above, the cyclonic torpedoes began their descent. Ferrum Primus stood in the breaking crown while the first warheads burned across the void toward him. Around it, reactor fire became dawn. The forge ring split. Cathedrals of ammunition tumbled away into space. Grey Knight wards flickered in the ruin. Iron warriors' corpses burned. Plague spores died in plasma flame. Rubricae dust scattered through decompression winds. The graven anvil dragged itself away from the kill sphere, wounded and aflame. The maw of kindly ruin laughed through rotting bells. Thousand Sun ships vanished behind impossible angles. Ferrum Primus looked up. Every targeting eye opened. Every barrel shifted. Every gland tightened. Every weapon voice inside the monster found the same sky and named it target. The cyclonic strike began. Ferrum Primus opened every weapon in his body to answer. The strike did not save Varadon Secundus. Salvation was a word for sermons, deathbeds, and frightened men who had not yet learned the scale of the galaxy. The cyclonic fire came down in white wrath and burning judgment, and for a time the system looked clean only because everything was too bright to see clearly. Then the light faded, the screams died, the pict feeds returned in fragments. Vox channels stuttered awake one by one, carrying static, distress cant, machine sobbing, and the hollow confirmations of weapons officers who had fired upon their own species until their throats bled. Varadon Secundus remained, not alive, not saved. It endured as a broken object behind walls of warning. Kill beacons circled the Forge world and its moons in ordered rings, transmitting quarantine codes in High Gothic, Binharic, and Inquisitorial cipher. Their message was simple enough for any shipmaster, mutant pirate, renegade trader, mechanicus scavenger, or desperate refugee to understand. Approach and die. The system's once radiant manufacturum chains had become grave architecture. The crown of Varadon, that continent-sized ring of industry and holy murder, had fallen in pieces across the world it once fed. Its fragments had carved new seas of glass into the crust. Its orbital foundries lay half-buried through hive cities, refinery fields, trench belts, pilgrimage roads, and artillery plains. The furnace moons turned slowly above a world that no longer manufactured anything but radiation and ghosts. The Imperium declared the campaign a victory. It did so because the alternative was heresy of a more dangerous kind. To admit defeat was one thing. The Imperium had endured defeats before. Worlds burned, chapters died. Crusades failed. Saints were martyred. Regiments vanished into casualty ledgers thicker than hive walls. Defeat could be sermonized. Defeat could be shaped into sacrifice, and sacrifice could be fed back into the machine of faith. But to admit that victory had ceased to mean anything was another matter. So the scribes wrote victory. So the priests spoke victory. So the admirals transmitted victory. So the dead remained dead beneath a victorious sky. The surface of Varadon Secundus had become a continent-wide graveyard of glass, ash, and dead engines. Half-melted titans knelt in fields of fused sand, their god-machine skulls cracked open, their princeps entombed in burnt amniotic thrones. Knight suits stood frozen in final combat stances, one arm raised, one leg gone, their heraldry burned away by orbital fire. Lehman Russ hulls lay stacked in drifts like broken ammunition crates. Basilisk barrels pointed at clouds that would never rain. Manufactorum crawlers sat with their loading claws open, filled not with shells but with bodies fused into lumps of armor, bone, and slag. Human skeletons lay everywhere. Some were clean white beneath ash, some were blackened into charcoal. Some had fused with weapons in ways that made recovery teams stop transmitting and reach for flamers. A guardsman's ribcage held a laser gun through the sternum as if the weapon had grown there. A dead loader servitor sat upright beside an ammunition shrine, its hands locked around a shell that had teeth marks in the casing. In a trench that had once been part of the eastern quarantine line, a dozen bodies had melted into a single shape around a heavy bolter whose barrel still clicked once every few hours. No birds crossed the sky. No hymns rose from the shrines. No industry shook the ground. Only radiation moved freely. Only static sang. Only the occasional click of ammunition forming inside corpses gave proof that something beneath the ash still remembered purpose. Inquisitor Malchus Venn survived aboard the crippled command vessel, Judgment Without Dawn. The ship hung above Varadon with one flank open to the void, its outer chapels burned, its gun decks vented, its engines limping under the care of terrified engine seers who knew that every repair was being watched for contamination. The command deck had no grand windows left. They had been sealed with armor shutters after the blast wave from the Crown's destruction threw a frigate's corpse through the upper hull. The air tasted of smoke, antiseptic, old blood, and psychic exhaustion. Venn sat alone at a data lectern while the official record formed beneath his hands. His augmetic eyes did not blink. The Obliterator outbreak was contained. He paused, then let the sentence stand. The Iron Warrior's host was crippled and denied further access to the Varadon industrial network. Another truth, the Forge system was denied to the enemy through righteous extermination protocols. Also true, no viable samples were recovered by hostile forces. He watched that sentence for a long time. Then he deleted the word viable. No samples were recovered by hostile forces. He looked at the new sentence and allowed it to remain because official truth was not the same as truth. Official truth served containment. Truth served only terror when no weapon could be brought to bear against it. Every sentence in the report was technically true. Every sentence was also a lie. The truth was worse. Ferrum Primus had not survived as a body. No whole monster rose from the cyclonic fire. No walking arsenal strode away from Varadon, roaring sermons of impact into the void. The strike had destroyed the greater mass. It had shattered the reactor organs, burned the ammunition glands, torn the recoil spine into slag, and scattered the weapon flesh across kilometers of falling forge ring and molten battlefield. But the virus had never needed wholeness to remember. Fragments endured. A shell casing was found beneath glass near the remains of Bastion Kiln 88. It was warm. Inside it, instead of propellant, there was marrow. When a servitor tried to lift it, the casing pulsed and drove a spur through the machine's claw. A targeting lens blinked in the ash outside Hive Lamentum. It had no power cell, no cable, no socket, no operator. It tracked the movement of the recovery team until Ven ordered the entire district burned with lance fire from orbit. A melted bolter lay half buried beneath a collapsed macro shell magazine. Its casing had fused into a shape resembling a heart. It beat once every 9 minutes. Each beat transmitted a firing solution across dead Vox channels. A chunk of armor was recovered from the Western Manufacturum Arc. It whispered through the Auspex arrays in a voice made of range, mass, and hunger. 3 adepts died trying to interpret it. A 4th began loading shells into his own opened abdomen before stormtroopers shot him apart and burned the remains. Ven ordered all fragments destroyed. Some were. In the Eye of Terror, the surviving Iron Warriors of the Grave-Forged host recovered one that was not. Their ships returned crippled and diminished through storms of impossible color, without the Graven Anvil's full strength, without Warsmith Draal, without the old certainties. Draal was dead or missing, which to Iron Warriors meant only that his authority had ceased to function. His lieutenants did not mourn him. Mourning was for those who believed loss changed duty. They counted armor, ammunition, hull integrity, slaves, gene seed, and enemies. Then they counted the fragment. It was no larger than a warrior's fist. A knot of black armor, brass, and dried meat. It contained no visible mechanism. It generated no heat on first inspection. It did not speak when threatened. It did not react when a slave was made to touch it and then flayed to test for infection. So they placed it on an anvil of cold iron in the deepest forge chamber of a captured asteroid foundry. The lieutenants stood around it in silence. One said, "The Warsmith failed to bind the asset." Another said, "Then we will not repeat his method." A third said, "We build around it." That was enough. They began construction. A shrine forge rose around the fragment, though no Iron Warrior called it shrine at first. They called it a containment foundry, then a study vault, then an armament chapel. The names changed because the truth beneath them grew teeth. Slaves were chained into work pits. Warpsmiths carved binding geometry into the walls. Ammunition racks were arranged in concentric circles. Broken heavy weapons taken from dead worlds were placed before the fragment as offerings disguised as tests. The fragment did nothing. Then, during the 47th watch, a rusted autocannon shell on the nearest rack rolled toward it without being touched. The Iron Warriors watched. None of them ordered the shell returned. In a hidden Dark Mechanicum vault that did not exist in real space and therefore could not be found by any fleet, Malagrax Nethor's stolen sample awakened. The vault drifted between coordinates, anchored by murdered machine spirits and warded in scrap code written through the death agonies of servitors. Nethor's body had been burned by the Grey Knights. His primary memory stacks were ash. His laboratory aboard the Crown had become dust falling through atmosphere. His name had been marked destroyed in more than one ledger. His precautions continued without him. The sample rested in a black reliquary suspended above a data altar. It was small, a clot of armor flesh and ammunition gland tissue preserved in a fluid that sang quietly to itself. Around it stood racks of weapons, inactive servitors, dormant mechadendrites, and empty surgical frames. The first sign was movement without command. A mechadendrite hanging from the ceiling uncoiled slowly and turned toward the reliquary. Then a second, then a third. The servitors followed. Their heads rotated, one by one, though no activation rune had been spoken. Dead eyes opened behind cloudy lenses. Surgical clamps clicked. A bone saw revved once and fell silent. A weapon rack bent inward. It did not collapse. It inhaled. The guns mounted upon it shifted in their brackets, muzzles dipping toward the reliquary. A las pistol's casing split and leaked red fluid. A bolt gun magazine clicked empty, though it had never been loaded. The sample pulsed inside its glass. Somewhere in the dead machine code of the vault, Malagrax Nethor's final note repeated in a loop. Desire may be engineered. A plague hulk belonging to Lord Morbus 7 received a contaminated shell 3 warp translations later. It came aboard the Maw of Kindly Ruin inside a crate of salvage pulled from the edge of the Varadon debris field by a lesser rot craft too slow to escape Imperial fire and too diseased to die quickly. The crate was sealed in rust and prayer. Its contents were presented before Morbus in a chapel whose pews were made from coffins and whose altar dripped with blessed filth. The Death Guard champion lifted the shell in one swollen gauntlet. It was heavy, warm, slick beneath the corrosion. His plague marines watched from the gloom, patient and amused. Flies crawled across their lenses. Bells tolled somewhere deep in the Hulk's gut. Morbus laughed. "Grandfather's patience wins all things," he said. "Iron rusts, fire cools, hunger ferments. The little gun god returns to soil." The shell clicked in his hand. Morbus tilted his horned helm. The shell laughed back, not with a mouth, with triggers. The sound passed through the plague chapel and made the bolters in every Death Guard hand twitch toward their bearers' chests. Morbus stopped laughing. The shell warmed further, as if pleased by the silence it had earned. Far away, in a chamber of blue glass and impossible angles, Vor Asher studied a prophecy that would not remain still. The Thousand Suns sorcerer had survived Varadon because survival was sometimes a matter of not occupying the same moment as death. His armor was cracked. His staff had lost one of its eyes. Half his rubricae were gone, their dust scattered through a collapsing section of the crown. He did not grieve them. Dust could be gathered. Names could be rewritten. Loss was only a question asked by time, and time could be deceived if spoken to in the correct tense. Before him, a disk of silver flame displayed Ferrum Primus. At first, it showed the monster as he had seen it. A walking arsenal, a weapon saint without a god, a body that had become ammunition scripture. Then the image changed. Ferrum Primus became a line of shells across a battlefield. Then a wounded warrior gripping a gun too tightly. Then a manufactorum worker kissing a rifle barrel. Then a tank crewman whispering to his battle cannon before firing. Then an iron warrior standing alone in a dark armory, palms split open, blood crawling into a heavy weapon. Asher understood. Ferrum Primus had never been the end. It was a pattern. Every battlefield fed it. Every weapon taught it. Every warrior who loved his gun more than his soul opened the first door. The virus was slow. It was rare. It consumed time, material, will, and transhuman endurance to produce a true obliterator. Most carriers would die. Most mortals would become cult filth, failed holsters, screaming waste. Even Astartes would reject the Union more often than they ascended into artillery flesh. That limitation had once saved the galaxy from more of them, but the Iron Warriors had learned methods. The Dark Mechanicum had preserved samples. The Plague God's servants had tasted kinship. The servants of change had seen equation. The Imperium had burned a world and still failed to erase certainty. Asher reached toward the prophecy. The silver flame became a gun barrel aimed at his face. He withdrew his hand and smiled behind his helm. On Varadon Secundus, centuries of industry cooled into ash. Recovery teams stopped landing after the 7th failed sweep. Too many vanished. Too many returned with weapons they refused to surrender. Too many Auspex skulls recorded movement beneath glass planes where no movement should have remained. The kill beacons multiplied. The system was sealed behind interdiction codes, mine webs, warning prayers, and silent guns. Ven's report travelled to sealed archives beneath sigils of the Ordo Malleus. The public record named the Varadon action a triumph of decisive containment. The restricted record named it a strategic sterilization. The deepest record, accessible only by blood sign, psychic key, and authority that could condemn sectors, contained a final annotation in Ven's own hand. Containment uncertain, 300 light-years away on a warfront whose name had already changed twice in command records, a nameless Chaos Space Marine walked among the dead. The world was mud, wire, smoke, and broken Imperial armor. It might have been any world. That was the horror of the galaxy. Every battlefield believed itself unique until enough men died on it. Then all battlefields became the same altar viewed through different weather. He wore battered black plate marked by old allegiance and new scratches. He was not Iron Warriors, not Death Guard, not Thousand Suns, not anything grand enough to matter. A renegade among renegades, a survivor of a warband too small for history, armed with a chain blade, an empty bolt pistol, and hatred kept alive by habit. His squad had been reduced by loyalist artillery. Their ammunition was gone. Their prey had fled or died. The mud was filled with bodies, loyal and traitor, man and transhuman, all sinking slowly beneath rain the color of engine oil. He found the heavy bolter beside a crater. Its former owner lay beneath it, an Imperial gunner crushed flat from the chest down, fingers still locked around the trigger grips. The weapon was old, scarred, and heavy enough that a mortal team would have needed 2 men to carry it properly. The renegade looked at it for a long moment. No slave stood nearby to haul it. No ammunition bearer lived to feed it. No officer ordered him to take it. He reached down anyway. The grip was warm. He frowned, then lifted. The heavy bolter came up easily, as if it had expected him. Its weight settled against his armor. Its stock fit beneath his arm. Its trigger sat beneath his finger with intimate certainty. The weapon did not feel recovered. It felt returned. The Chaos Space Marine smiled. Beneath his gauntlet, his palm split open to welcome it.